Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, August 20th, 2018. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, journalist Anna Clark on the poisoned city, Flint's water, and the American urban tragedy. Also on the program today, Michael Cohen looking at 20 million new reasons why he might want to start talking about Donald Trump to federal authorities. Meanwhile, Don McGahn has been talking to federal authorities, the Mueller investigation, but probably not about the stuff that he's in trouble for. Meanwhile, confirmation that the bomb that killed 40 children in Yemen was supplied directly by the U.S. We've got the name of the companies that make these wonderful killing machines. New York Times endorses Zephyr Teachout for New York Attorney AG position, possibly one of the most important, if not the most important state positions in the country, or could be. It's Monday. One more opportunity to remind you that ICE is a terror organization. The ACLU looks to sue Georgia over its disenfranchisement plan. And the heartwarming story of a Trumpista that became a Black Lives Matter activist. Lastly, fact checkers flattened by the truth of Medicare for all. All this and more, ladies and gentlemen, on today's program. Yes, it is Monday, getting closer to the end of summer. We're a week away from our big vacation. Everybody else has been on vacation. Everyone else in this office has been on vacation already, I should just say. But this is my big vacation. This is when I let it all hang out, folks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, watch out.
Pump up the volume.
Exactly. Exactly. With the kids for 7 days straight.
Did you say pump up the Valium?
Valium.
Yeah, the Valium.
Just checking.
Oh, really?
Hey, I just want to do an update on what we talked about on Friday. So on Friday, we had Ronald Reagan on to talk about a client of his who was on bond. Or I should say, being held subject to bond. The guy's name was Umberto. He was brought to the country when he was just 3 years old. In 2014, Umberto became a father. He is being detained in the Northwest Detention Center. An immigration judge set bond at $15,000. Umberto's mom did not have this money. They really had no idea what they were going to do. Ronald Reagan set up a GoFundMe. He came on Friday. I think at that point, maybe they had raised $1,000 or $2,000. As of now, they are $1,300 past the goal of $15,000. Obviously not just a function of you listeners, but a big part of that is from the listeners. On top of which, because of the system with GoFundMe, Umberto would not be released, I think, until later this week. At the end of the week, maybe the end of the month. Another listener apparently has stepped up and said that he or she would front the money and get paid back via the GoFundMe. So incredibly generous. The generosity that you've all shown is amazing. I imagine some of that extra cash is going to go into the attempt to build this rolling bond fund so that when folks find themselves in the position that Umberto is in, they will rely on the bond fund and it will be replenished slowly. So this is, I think, will hopefully end up being a long-term project. But you should all feel very proud of this community. I certainly do. And so thank you for your generosity. You've materially impacted the life of not just Umberto, but his children, or his child, and his parents. So good for you. Meanwhile, let's turn to this story. This is also a heartwarming story of a slightly different flavor. This is coming out of Lakeland, Florida. This is a Florida airport. I'm not sure which one. Apparently, a customer, Jeffrey Epstein, he's a doctor in Lakeland, Florida, was unhappy with the service that he was getting from the airline. We've all been there. It's very, very frustrating. Well, Jeffrey Epstein, according to him after the fact, wanted to make a point. So he started to increase his volume, and at one point, police officers came, and he was rather challenging with them, not physically, but so as you can see, he's dressed in a business suit, and here he is being apprehended by the police in the Lakeland, Florida airport. Listen to what the revelation he has in the course of him struggling with the police.
I'm not. Stop. Do not hurt me. Do not hurt me. You understand? Do not be rough with me. Look at them. Look at them. They're going to beat me up. Don't beat me up, you mother. Don't beat me up. Look at them. Oh, my God. I can't believe they're doing this. Oh, my God. Hey. Look what they're doing. Oh, get to the other side. I'm not listening, asshole. You're being rough with me. You treat me like a black person. You're gonna get sprayed. You're gonna get sprayed. Release your hands. Put it behind your back. You understand me?
There you go. He realizes in the course of resisting arrest that he's being treated like a black person. He uses another adjective to make that point, but it's beeped out. He ultimately was sprayed to get him to put his arms behind his back. According to an affidavit acquired by a news station, WESH, he told police that he, quote, created a very big disturbance, and I did it on purpose. If you're going to do this to a white doctor who's 59 years old for doing nothing, then why would black people trust you?
So basically, every Trump, in line with all conservative experiences and conversions to supporting things like civil rights, every single Trump supporter needs to be assaulted by the police in this country.
I'm a conservative Republican. I'm a Trump guy. But until the police fix this problem, I don't blame black people for being upset when they get arrested.
Yeah, note to Florida man, do not take your flocka the same day that you fly. It's never going to end well.
Sam, as you know, I have a Blue Lives Matter tat on my abdomen. No one supports the men in blue more than me, and perhaps there should be a style guide, Samantha, so people can understand this character at some point. But that being said, we are men, not animals. And when you see Dr. Epstein treated in this manner, he's not a thug. He's not a spear chucker. He's not someone who hates this country. He's a Jewish doctor. And if it could happen to him, well, it certainly could happen to your goddamn Rachel face.
Right. Well,
So
but
think
that's not
about
really
it
the point.
and get serious.
He goes on
Those
to say,
boys must have had a very bad day dealing with Dominicans or something.
goes on to say, I was not in danger. I was being loud because I wanted everyone else to see, Epstein told WESH. After being released from jail, big companies have to take care of their customers. And when they call the cops in, they got to de-escalate, not escalate. He seems to be all over the place.
He's all over the
He's a little bit of like a consumer advocate, a little bit of a Black Lives Matter supporter.
all inside,
Yeah.
all wrapped in one
Huge
entitled
amount
Trump
of
asshole show.
Yes. I had my white privilege suspended for a very brief moment. I am supposed to be able to yell at the people in the airport. I am a doctor.
He really lost me in the last 5 seconds, Dad.
Folks, this actually, I turned somebody on to this Liquid IV just this weekend. They have, I know somebody who gets like severely dehydrated. And they get a headache and like the neck. Summer's in full swing. We're all feeling the heat. Thankfully, Liquid IV helps prevent dehydration, especially when spending more time outside, the beach, hiking, and having fun. Liquid IV is not your average electrolyte drink mix. With non-GMO, clean ingredients, it's a healthy alternative to sports drink, and it can provide the same hydration as drinking 2 to 3 bottles of water. It even contains 5 essential vitamins, including more vitamin C than an orange and as much potassium as a banana. They have convenient TSA-friendly powder packs that help prevent jet lag and altitude sickness for all your summer travels. That is the big thing. Travel, and then heavy drinking. I think it seems to be the problem, my friend. Look, I love Liquid IV. I know you will too. Still have. Well, now we're down to 2 packets there. Don't
We
take
use it
those.
around
I
here.
know that. Do not take any of those. Those are my packets. Stop.
Stop it.
Right now. My listeners, get off of me! My listeners get 20% off at liquid-iv.com when you use my code MAJORITY at checkout. That's 20% off anything you order at Liquid IV's website. Go to liquid-iv.com. Enter my promo code MAJORITY. Get your savings. Start getting better hydration. That's liquid-iv.com. Promo code MAJORITY. Don't wait. Get hydrated today. Folks, I did Hayes Friday night with Ali Velshi. It's the first time.
Hi, Ali.
He was a nice guy. He's a perfectly nice guy.
He seems like a nice guy.
He did 15 shows last week because he was filling in for Hayes.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot of shows. Meanwhile, that's my long way of saying I had to shave. And as always, I shaved with my Harry's. Harry's founders knew that a great shave comes down to great blades made with sharp, durable steel that lasts. That's why they make some of the highest quality blades in the world, priced much lower than the leading brand, and they'll even give you a full refund if you don't love your shave. That's nuts. All you got to do is let them know within 30 days. Harry stands behind the quality of their blades, so they created a $13 value trial set that comes with everything you need for a close, comfortable shave. They got the weighted ergonomic handle. That's my favorite. They got the 5-blade razor with a lubricating strip. I feel like I could get away with 4 blades. But the lubricating strip and the trimmer blade, those are key for me. Rich lathering shave gel, the travel blade cover, which of course is important unless you want your hands all cut up. Claim yours by going to harrys.com/majority report. And now listeners can redeem their trial set at harrys.com/majority report. You got to go to harrys.com/majority report to redeem your offer. Let them know I sent you to support the show. And these guys have stuck with us through thick and thin, Harry's. They really have.
Yeah.
Lastly,
True story.
as I look out across and I did some work in the studio this weekend.
Very proud
looks
of
pretty,
yourself.
I am. This is
Handyman
pretty
Sammy.
sweet setup here.
Every time I see you do something new, I always think of that guy on Chappelle's show with where he goes, "Pray to God that doesn't fall."
Yeah, I
Pray to God that don't fall.
I do have that feeling. It was a little dicey. It was not easy putting that up by myself. There was a lot of trial and error, I can assure you. But as I look out on this newly renovated set, I actually see a hire from ZipRecruiter. Hiring used to be hard. You had multiple job sites, stacks of resumes, confusing review process. Today, hiring can be easy. You only have to go to one place to get it done, ZipRecruiter.com/majority. That's where Brendan Finn showed up. That's where we found him. He was lost in the wilderness. No idea what to do with his life. Young kid, took him off the streets.
He's like, "You guys, you don't like fish, right?" And we were like, "No." And he's like, "Okay, I will work here, sir."
I don't know what that means. With their powerful matching technology, ZipRecruiter sends your job to over 100 of the web's leading job boards, scans thousands of resumes to find people with the right experience to apply. As applications come in, ZipRecruiter analyzes each one and spotlights the top candidates so you never miss a great match. ZipRecruiter is so effective that 80% of employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site within the first day. True. Folks, small business. We don't have a smaller business. You can't have a smaller business in this one. But mid-size, big business, super easy. If you're an HR person, this is an awesome, I would think this would be an awesome sort of like back end for you. Super easy to use. I found great candidates. It's no wonder ZipRecruiter has the highest rated hiring site in America. And now my listeners can try ZipRecruiter for free at this exclusive web address, ZipRecruiter.com/majority. That's ZipRecruiter.com/majority. ZipRecruiter.com/majority, folks. It's the smartest way to hire. And I have said this before, the best time to start looking for people is when you do not need them. So even if you're not hiring anybody right now, go check it out. Get a sense of what you do need and what's out there. Believe me, it'll save yourself so much heartbreak and difficulty when that person comes up and tells you like, "Oh, hey, I'm leaving. I got 2 weeks." Yep. All right, folks, going to take a quick break and head to, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking to Anna Clark, journalist, about the poison city, Flint's water, and the American urban tragedy. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program a Detroit-based author and journalist, Anna Clark, on her latest, The Poison City, Flint's Water, and the American Urban Tragedy. Welcome to the program, Anna.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very glad to be here.
Okay, let's start before, and obviously, and I think people, hopefully this audience has some, at the very least, some sort of broad stroke awareness of this entire episode, which in some respects is not nearly over, neither for Flint or other urban cities in the country. And when we talk about Flint, we talk about 12 people who are killed. Many more we don't know the implications of. And right now there are 15 people who have been indicted. But before we get to any of that, let's go to prior to this specific crisis. Let's talk a little bit about Flint, which in 1960 had double the population and was a booming city.
It was. It had about 200,000 people. It had been growing very fast, and the leaders of the city at the time thought the city was only going to continue to grow. They were, of course, an industrial hub for General Motors. There were a number of other manufacturing companies there. There was a thriving cultural scene. There was a sort of a nationally renowned community schools movement. And Flint was also one of the most segregated cities in the country. It had two African-American neighborhoods, and those lines were rigidly held. It was literally the most segregated city in the North and the third most segregated city nationwide. So in the 60s was, with folks pouring into the city for all these jobs, the Great Migration, made Flint a real destination. There was also a lot of growing tension about unequal opportunity in Flint.
What made Flint? I mean, my sense is, having spent a decent amount of time in Michigan over the past decade or so, that when we talk about the urban and rural suburban divide in Michigan, we're talking about race. And many of the stories about Michigan, I mean, obviously in this country too, race plays a big factor. But why? I mean, what were the forces that kept Flint so segregated?
Well, it was racism. There was the leaders of the community, both the political leaders and General Motors leaders, the folks at influential foundations, including the C.S. Mott Foundation. These were often the same people, and they had no faith at all that a community could thrive if it were integrated. They just didn't believe it was possible. And so you got these almost absurd scenarios where, maybe an African-American family, is able to work with a white ally, for example, and move into a white neighborhood. And then you would immediately see the school district sort of, change its boundaries to keep the children of that family from going to the so-called white school. There's a historic field house in Flint called Burston Field House, a real neighborhood hub for the youth in the area. They had a very popular swimming pool that white children were welcome to 6 days a week, while black children were relegated to a sprinkler across the street. That one day that African-American children could use the pool, after they left, the field house would drain it and refill it with new water before the white children came back the next day. You had city leaders performing in blackface for laughs at charity events, and you had some, really familiar forms of intimidation too that we've seen, all over the country. And I think Flint's kind of interesting because its African American population had its big surge a little bit later than a lot of other communities in the North. A lot of, the migration, like Detroit kind of acted as a sponge, that like made the surge for Flint's African American community come a little bit later than others. But when it did come, it came fast. And the population, in the 1960s, African American population in Flint had like quintupled in just, a couple of decades. And they were still only limited to those two neighborhoods. So they were just bursting at the seams. And, and people are, of course, taking advantage of that, with, outrageously priced, apartments that weren't up to code, for example. Flint, interestingly, it had one of the first African American mayors. The mayor position was a little bit different at the time. It was more like a city council president. It was appointed. Right. But even the mayor himself was only allowed to purchase a home in one of these two neighborhoods. He eventually becomes a fair housing advocate through the movement that was rising in that city in the 1960s.
So, okay, so that's where Flint was in the 60s. And then walk us through, we start to see it's impacted by sort of, I guess, 3 or 4 different forces that create a downward spiral in terms of resources and in terms of the health of the city.
Yeah, there's a number of different things going on, and of course, all interrelated with each other. For example, so in Flint, like in a lot of other communities, once fair housing laws were passed, once school desegregation laws were passed, people started leaving. Flint marked its first ever downturn in population in 1970, which is, less than 2 years after the National Fair Housing Act and after Flint passed an ordinance itself for fair housing, finally. And immediately, white people generally, were moving out to the suburbs. So that's another force, is just the rise of these suburbs, these communities on the outskirts of core cities that were being subsidized and incentivized by a number of state and federal policies. Highways made it easier to commute, for example. And people were able to sort of recreate a sort of de facto segregation, and they were also able to, supported by a number of lending policies and insurance policies that set those suburban communities up to succeed. There was also the industrial factories were beginning to disperse, right? And that's just for a number of global reasons that was happening too, but also some of that was happening because of national policies. There was, for example, during the Truman administration, they passed. Was it the Truman? I'm misspeaking, but there was a presidential policy that was wanted to that felt like it was a vulnerability to have to concentrate our industries, and so there was incentivized programs to disperse them to suburbs and sometimes very far afield. So that also led to a lot of industrial vacancy in Flint, as well as residential vacancy. And this, and then you're also just seeing the sort of legacy of this infrastructure inequality that we built into a city like Flint, just play out as you would expect when there's no one intervening to stop it, and it leads us to the point that, we're seeing people have unequal access to drinking water.
Right. And so by the time we get up to the aughts, right, and we have the financial crisis, just tell us a little bit about the idea of revenue sharing and the implications for Flint in the way that Michigan handled their revenue sharing, particularly with a place like Flint.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think that's one of the most influential yet under-chronicled aspects of the Flint water crisis is revenue sharing. So this is it's basically how local governments are funded. States collect money through sales taxes, and then disperses that money to local governments. It's not like sort of a charitable act by the state. It's often like by statute, or by state constitution, and it gives, it provides, distributes this money to local governments that they are then able to use for a number of public services. In Michigan, that beginning in about 2002, the state started just keeping the revenue sharing to fill holes in its own budget. Michigan was going through a number of financial challenges, and it felt like it needed this money. And so, and even when the state began to have a budget surplus again, it has continued this practice of withholding revenue sharing from its communities. This is deeply unpopular among local government leaders, and has led many communities to, have to make cuts that they wouldn't otherwise want to make. But in communities that were already in a kind of shaky place like Flint, it has been absolutely devastating. So Flint, for example, had it received the same amount of revenue sharing that it would have otherwise received had the state not, made such severe cuts, it would have had an additional $55 million between 2002 and 2016 to invest in its own public services. It needed that money. The lack of that money is probably part of what accounted for the state deciding that Flint was in such a severe financial emergency that it needed one of its own appointed emergency managers to take control. I think it's interesting to put Michigan's revenue sharing story in national context too. Even throughout the national recession, only 5 states, reduced the amount of revenue sharing it provided to local governments. With the loss of property taxes, for example,
Right.
during the housing crisis, they really, most actually increased it. But 5 states, including Michigan, made cuts. And Michigan was by far the most. The second most was Kansas, with about 14%. It cut revenue sharing about 14%. Michigan cut it like 50-some%.
And we should note, Kansas, of course, as of 2012, started deep tax cuts, ostensibly because Arthur Laffer is a magician, and there was going to be a lot more revenue after you made all those tax cuts, and so nothing happened there. And I would also guess, and just to be clear, so that people understand this, property taxes are usually earmarked to local schools and whatnot, and to the extent that there has to be makeups from there, it puts even more stress on the state to make up that difference. I would bet, and I don't know, but I would bet that in the years preceding this, there were tax cuts for wealthy people in Michigan, would be my guess. And in some ways, this is how it's paid for. The state doesn't have the money when it's crunch time because the tax cuts, and they just basically pull it from the municipalities. And then all of a sudden it becomes the political problem and real life problem of the municipalities. And the elected state representatives get away with their tax cut.
Yeah, there's this really weird compartmentalization almost. On one hand, you have the state government sort of suggesting that the fiscal problems in these local communities is just a matter of local leadership. That's your own fault for not being able to balance the budget, et cetera, et cetera. At the same time, it's enacting these policies that are literally, and strategically disinvesting in them, and just sort of feigning ignorance about what the real life consequences are, especially for communities like Flint, like Detroit, where I live, like a number of communities across the state that are more vulnerable, that have a profound amount of vacancy, that aren't able to collect a lot from property taxes. Communities in Michigan are very, very limited in how they're able to raise revenue of any kind. With the these cuts to revenue sharing statewide, you're seeing a lot of other communities put income taxes on the ballot. They're trying to fill holes that the state seems determined not to restore.
And again, it seems like to me that it's it's just this is maybe painting with just a slightly too broad a brush, but it seems like sort of a racial calculation and a political racial calculation where Governor Snyder says, like, I'm really not the governor of the cities in this state, more or less. I'm the governor of the suburbs and the rural communities, and they're not. So we can starve the cities and pay no political price. I mean, and then of course it gets worse as we go on. So we get to the point where in, I guess it's 2011, Darnell Early is appointed emergency manager. Tell us about what emergency manager. I mean, hopefully people have just a small sense of this, but I think Flint used a weak city council, strong city manager system, which is at least accountable to the city council. The the emergency manager is not. Tell us about that program.
Sure. Okay, so emergency management is a system that started, its roots in Michigan came in the late 80s, and it was initially a law designed to, kind of provide state oversight and resources to one particular community, Hamtramck. And it was since expanded to apply to other cities and school districts that were struggling. But it was rarely used, and initially these emergency financial managers, as they were called at the time, only had authority over budgets. And after the election of Governor Snyder, and with the Republicans controlling all levels of our government, they passed a more expanded version of this law that set a lower bar for what would qualify community for this kind of state intervention, and it gave these emergency managers really a really wide authority. So not only would the state-appointed administrator have the full authority of a city council and mayor, they would also have the full authority of a school board or a superintendent if it was a school. And but they could also make or break contracts unilaterally. They could sell resources. The one thing they can't do is miss a bond payment to creditors, which I think is interesting. They also can stay.
I don't want to skip over that for a second. I don't want to skip over that because that's really important, because it's basically saying like we're functionally in what looks like a chapter 11 situation, or maybe I guess a bankruptcy. Maybe there's a specific number for it in terms of, and we're getting protection essentially from all our creditors. We don't owe anybody anything we promised except for the wealthy people who have loaned us the money.
Yeah, it's like, that's the thing. Like, if a city stopped missing these payments, then suddenly it's going to start affecting the credit ratings of other communities and of the state in general, and to protect them from the negative consequences of that, they bar these disinvested communities that are very broke from missing a single one of those payments, while providing no similar level of protection for, say, the public services of required to support the well-being of residents within that community. So yeah, and this upset people. This was controversial enough that it went up for a statewide referendum in 2012, and Michigan voters voted it down. They're like, this is too much. It's too far, going too far. And about a month later, the lame duck legislature passed a nearly identical version of the law with some tweaks to it. And one of the most significant tweaks was that it added appropriations to the bill, which made it immune from another referendum. They really hurried this along, probably because they knew that emergency management for Detroit was imminent, and also our bankruptcy.
What was the response in Michigan to this? Because this is so blatantly anti-democratic. First of all, you have a piece of anti-democratic legislation, right, that gets rejected by the voters, and then the same people pushing this anti-democratic legislation reject the rejection by the voters. They did. Like, what was the reaction in Michigan? Were people just not? I mean, at one point you would think people would start getting outraged by this, but
I think people were, but also like, it was, reported on the time. It was clear it was happening at the time, but then suddenly like the train just kept on moving. Like, within a couple months, here's the Detroit emergency manager, and then a couple months after that, the bankruptcy set. So like suddenly everything, it wasn't lost on folks. There have been a number of lawsuits challenging this emergency manager law, not least for its racially disparate impact, which has voting rights implications.
Right, and that's the point, right? I mean, ultimately, there wasn't enough white people who were impacted by this, who cared to actually punish their politicians in terms of their vote.
Yeah, I think too, though, like a lot of the people who like pushed this along were also like lame ducks. It was after the election. They weren't going to, they were term limited, et cetera. They were able to put this in. The governor had just been reelected for another term, Yeah, I mean, but and this is, and I think what's also important to, reflect on is like, even with the prominence of Flint's story, and even as there has been a lot of reflection on the limits of and failures of the emergency manager law, suggestions for reform, if not outright appeal, the law as it was then stands now. It has not been changed. It is still on the books.
All right. So take us through. So with this law in place, the dilemma facing Flint was that they had been on a water system for 50 some odd years, that that water system had a monopoly essentially and was really overcharging, it seems like, Flint. And so Flint came up with another idea that we're going to get our own water from a different Great Lake, or just a different pipeline from that Great Lake. But then they had to do something in the interim, right? Is that the story?
Yeah, that's the gist of it. It's like what was happening was that so Flint back in the 60s, when it was growing, they felt like they needed to sign on with Detroit's water system to support what they thought was ongoing development and evolution for the city. They signed a long-term contract to get Detroit Lake Huron water from Detroit, one of the Great Lakes, and while there has been, cost was an issue, and I'll talk about that in just a minute, quality wasn't. They did get good quality water. The biggest problem that was facing Flint is that while they had lost half its population and, the industry that was using up to 60% of Flint's water supply, the infrastructure did not shrink accordingly, right? So you have far fewer and far poorer ratepayers supporting this gigantic system, and they can't do it. You just can't do it. Even though they were paying among the most expensive water rates in the nation, they weren't able to. They were still losing like 50% of their water through just leaks, which of course is driving up the rates even more.
So they didn't have the ability to take care of an infrastructure that had massive pipes, because they were used to bringing it into a ton of GM plants. And twice the population. It would be the functional equivalent of living in a big McMansion, and then all of a sudden all your 12 kids move out, and it's just you alone there, and you got to take care of the place.
Yeah, the math just does not work out. And there were things that they were especially, frustrated with the Detroit system for. Like the Detroit contract had, some upcharges for the distance it had to pipe water to Flint and elevation, things that were non-negotiable, it seemed. Flint didn't feel like they had a seat at the table, even though they were the system's second largest customer. So they were looking at other options for years, even before emergency management. They're looking for other options. And what they decided to do under emergency management, under its second emergency manager, it had 4 consecutive ones, beginning on in 2011. It was the first community in Michigan put under this expanded emergency manager law. So under emergency management, they decide they're going to join this brand new water system that's going to be built. It's also going to draw water from Lake Huron. except the communities are going to have to treat it itself, which is it's going to deliver raw water, partly because they wanted to serve agricultural customers and stuff like that. So Flint, under emergency management, decides they want to join the system. It's not even built yet. It won't be built for a couple of years. So again, under emergency management, they decided that in the interim, they'll reboot their old city plant, which they're going to need to reboot anyway, and they're going to treat their own water from the Flint River. And the Flint River, while it had been very, very heavily polluted in the 20th century because of all these industries, because of, environmental laws not really coming into play until the 1970s, the river is much healthier today than it once was. But it is, like any river, more complex to treat than lake water. The upgrades this plant received were not sufficient to deal with those complexities. And one of the most significant omissions was that the water was not treated with something called corrosion control, which is a violation of federal law. This is what you're supposed to add to a water supply to make sure that these old aging pipes that the water passes through in almost every community across the country does not corrode into the water and contaminate it by the time it reaches our taps. So, and this besides this city being under emergency management, the switch was also being supervised by the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. When they finally flipped the switch in April of 2014, turned off the Detroit water, they're going to the Flint River. There, you could see in the videos of this that you're not just seeing the mayor and the emergency manager there. You're seeing the legislative officials and MDQ officials there, celebrated and toasting it. And they're really championing this as like, look at Flint, like getting back to its roots and seeing this switch as a sign of sovereignty and so on. But it was. It was, of course, a celebration that they now regret.
Indeed, and it turned out to be quite tragic for a lot of people who ended up drinking that water. And so, just to reiterate, river water is a much different job. Treating river water, much different job than treating lake water, and the Great Lakes, obviously, probably the greatest source of fresh water, drinking water in the country, in the hemisphere, I guess. So they restart this old plant. They don't have the physical apparatus, and/or it seems to me the institutional memory in the form of people who have treated water to understand the implications of what they're doing, because to treat this water with anti-corrosive material is not terribly expensive, is it?
It wasn't terribly expensive, and it wasn't even in some ways it just seems like completely baffling, especially because the State Department of Environmental Quality is like supervising this, and they were saying, a lot of this is, I should note, a lot of this story is being contested in courtrooms right now. But there was the State Environmental Authority, saying that, this is fine. This is fine as it is. They read the law in a different way, I guess,
But aren't they scientists? Aren't they people who, okay, the law says we don't have to do this, but if we look at this and we can just sort of just assess what we know about water, or were they just incompetent?
Yeah, it seems, it's completely mysterious, because it seems very, very logical. Even, I'm not a scientist, but it seems very logical that river water is more corrosive than lake water. If you put it through these aging pipes, including lead service lines, and you don't add any corrosion control, then the pipes are going to corrode faster than they normally would. And there was signs of this happening really soon after the switch. When people had discolored water, that was corroded iron. The switch happened in April of 2014. By October, a big GM engine plant was noticing that it was corroding their parts so severely that they needed to leave the city system and hook onto a suburbs water, which was still getting water from Detroit. And yet there was no intervention about how this might be affecting residents.
All right. Well, I want to just put a pin in that no intervention, because that gets back to the complete lack of democracy story and accountability. But we should just say that when GM switched over, the problems they were having with building the engines ended that day. Like it was that immediate. All right, so but let's just stop for a moment and tell us about the Legionnaire's disease.
Oh, yes. Like, one thing that's important to remember about Flint's story is that lead is definitely a piece of it, but there was a number of contamination issues. The first one that got on people's radar was E. coli bacteria that, caused a number of boil water advisories. There was also a carcinogenic byproduct of the disinfection process, something called TTHMs, a chemical compound. That was a violation of the Safe Drinking Water law. And then there was also this Legionnaire's disease outbreak. Legionnaire's disease is caused by a kind of waterborne bacteria called Legionella. It's not that you drink it, but you sort of inhale it, like through a water vapor, like in a shower or bath or something. When there have been outbreaks around the country, it often spreads through like air conditioning systems in like a large building. What it is it causes like a severe form of pneumonia. It's in your lungs. It's a severe form of pneumonia, and it can be deadly. The Flint and its vicinity experienced an outbreak of Legionnaire's disease over 2015 and 2016. But it was not made publicly known until, over 2014 and 2015, but it was not made publicly known until January 2016, which is the same month that, this was breaking in the national press in a very big way.
That's nuts, right? Like that's the primary function of your Department of Health is to say, we've got a problem here. Everybody needs to stop. Like, to stop, be suspect of those activities that could get you Legionnaire's disease.
Right. I mean, when there's been outbreaks, when there was an outbreak of Legionnaire's disease in the Bronx, I believe, over the summer of 2015, it was that, to their credit, like public health officials, made the news, put the news out there right away, even before they knew the exact source of the outbreak. So people could take what protections they felt like they needed to take,
and
especially
doctors,
vulnerable populations.
And doctors could know that like this is out there. So if you see symptoms that might be Legionnaire's disease, there's a higher.
You can test for it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Higher probability that it is. Right.
And within just a few weeks, they were able to trace it to the source. With the Flint story, there's still it's almost certainly connected to the water switch. There's scientific evidence to suggest that's so, but there's also a limited number of. It's difficult to prove because there wasn't the collection of biological samples at the time that one would need to do some direct comparisons, and there wasn't as much testing of people for Legionnaire's disease as you would expect if there was a lot of like widespread notice of this. And as you mentioned before, like this literally cost people's lives. Like 12 is the official record. There's a lot of people in Flint and some journalists too, including some folks from PBS Frontline who just did a really good examination of this who believe that the uptick in pneumonia deaths over the same time were probably really Legionnaire's disease and connected to that outbreak as well. It was just misdiagnosed.
Wow. All right. And so, and then let's talk about lead. I mean, I'd like to think that longtime listeners of this program are well-versed in how impactful exposure to lead can be. I mean, there's some who theorize that the massive drop in crime that we've seen nationally and internationally is a function of leaded gas being outlawed. And then 20 years later, we see these corresponding drops in crime because lead has such a strong impact on the development of the brain. And particularly in kids when their brains are developing. So there's no way to measure this, right? I mean, it's just, you don't know how much lead has been ingested by kids from Flint. Like, this is something like we won't know the implications of this for 20 some odd years.
I do think that's true. I do think that this is one thing that people mean when they say the Flint water crisis isn't over, is that, you have to wait for folks to grow up, and there's a number of recovery efforts that are happening, and, a number of reasons to have every bit of hope in the future for a lot of these really beautiful and brilliant children that are growing up in this community. But yeah, I think this is what you're saying about how lead works, just how it works. It makes it very tricky to trace very direct causes and effects. And this is why, even though lead is one of our best known neurotoxins, we've known of its toxic effect on humans for thousands of years, literally, we nonetheless built everything out of lead, our paint, our fuel, and our drinking water infrastructure. And that's partly, we partly got away with that, so to speak, because people, you had all this plausible deniability about how lead was actually affecting people. So children are absolutely more vulnerable, that they can absorb up to 5 times as much lead as an adult from the same amount of exposure. You can test it for a limited time in their when it's still in their blood, but then it's eventually absorbed into their bones and tissues, kind of like calcium is, and it stays there. This is why it can have, effect that goes on, later in life, It can cause developmental delays, it can cause kidney damage, it can cause, antisocial behavior, impulse, issues, a number of problems. It also is unhealthy for adults, and especially pregnant adults, infants, who drink formula with water that might have a high lead content are very vulnerable. It can cause fertility issues for people. There have been researchers looking, at Flint to see if there has been, a rise in miscarriages and stillbirths, or, just other issues that might be related to the water. It's just bad for us. And while we did finally get to the point where we put laws out banning, lead pipes put into new infrastructure systems and house paint, and we no longer have leaded fuel, that's all great, but we haven't done a full reckoning with the legacy of the lead that's still in our environment, that people are still coming in contact with every day. And this is part of why it's not just Flint story, right? We have lead everywhere.
And we should say they're all basically ticking time bombs, right? I mean, because the lead's there, that you can treat your water only so much in terms of being anti-corrosive. At one point, it starts to break down, and it just means that it breaks down later, right? I mean, so...
Yeah, that's one of the critiques that a lot of people have over our environmental laws, right? Our lead and copper rule nationally through the EPA, the minimum standards it's set are quite loose, and so is the sampling rules. And it allows up to 15 parts per billion of lead in 90% of homes in a community before it triggers a response. So 10% of homes in a community can have all kinds of lead in their drinking water. It doesn't raise any flags at all. This community
sounds
can
like
still call it
85%.
safe,
85%. It sounds like, right? Can have a tremendous amount of lead until you hit 91%. It doesn't kick in, or no? Do I misunderstand?
Nothing if a community can show that it's up to 90% of homes have of less than 15 parts per billion.
Okay.
Even
so,
then they can
so
quote unquote say it's safe.
So
no, we know no amount of lead is safe. We know that, but the law is written in a way because it acknowledges that there will be lead in our water, if so long as we have lead in our pipes and our plumbing infrastructure. Both in home and outside the home. And I think I would love to see Flint's story to help galvanize the political will for people to deal with that. We do got to get rid of it. Great, we're not putting new lead pipes in the ground, but how about getting rid of the ones that are already there?
All right, so
are getting older.
So we have 15 people who have been indicted who have been criminally charged around this, ranging from involuntary manslaughter to obstruction of justice. Different folks hiding the truth of this. How is it that Rick Snyder got away without any, it seems to me, legal consequences?
It's a lot of people have asked that. Okay, I have a few thoughts on that. I think, well, one thing that I think is true is that I do think that there are people who have responsibility for this, that just because their names aren't prominent as public figures does not mean that they were, that they didn't have like direct hands in the choices that led to this situation, right? So sometimes I've seen people react to the names of those who are indicted, and if they don't recognize them, they just assume they're scapegoats,
Right.
Which I don't think is quite accurate. Also, I think that we have some real limitations in our legal system and in our laws when it comes to environmental crimes. Even the most famous, so-called environmental triumphs, in the legal system, like the Aaron Brockovich case, for example, where there was citywide water contamination in Southern California. They always end in sort of settlements with no admission of wrongdoing. It's really hard to trace responsibility with these kinds of cases because of how they play out. So even in a community that's had, for example, let's say there's a cancer causing element in a community's groundwater, and you can see that the community is experiencing cancer at twice the level than you would expect it to be. For any one particular person's cancer, it's really hard to point it to the person
Right.
who contaminated it, because maybe they would have had cancer anyway. It's just how it's sort of how this works. And also, I think we're also dealing with one of the consequences of bureaucracy, which is that if everybody's responsible, nobody's responsible. There's everybody can sort of point to other people saying well, they were responsible for this decision, and then the other person was like, no, they were, and and the governor's been able to hold himself at some remove from a lot of this. According to him, he didn't know the full scope of the Flint water crisis until late September 2015, just shortly before the state finally conceded and helped hook Flint back onto Detroit water, which didn't solve all its problems, but was a big move.
Okay.
Even if you take him at his word, that's still wild.
Right. Yeah, and I don't. Frankly, I find that very hard to believe that there was no word back up, and your book sort of tells the story of basically how different folks in the community ended up forcing the hand, and the national reporting also started to create some pressure. So what is the status now, though? I mean, where is Flint now in terms of does everybody have clean drinking water? Supposedly.
Yeah. Well, what's happening right now is that because of a class action settlement, the state is paying to replace all of Flint's drinking water infrastructure because of the damage that corrosion did. That is a process that's still in place right now, and will continue until about 2019, 2020. That is one reason that a lot of folks feel like they don't yet trust the water coming out of their taps. It is Detroit water. It is appropriately treated. But when you do a big shakeup with the infrastructure like that, that is known, that's proven to sometimes cause upticks in lead and other contaminants, elsewhere in the system. The state has, however, as of April, discontinued the bottled water service it had been providing to residents, so where people could go to pickup sites and gather some cases of free bottled water for them and their families. That discontinued in April. The state said it was because they had seen, a couple rounds of lead tests that showed that the lead amounts were quote unquote normal. In other words, it's not that there was no lead, but it was comparable with other communities. So people had feelings about that.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. Yeah, so those are the bigger things that are happening, and then people are watching these criminal cases play out. It's probably going to take years before this all unfolds. But we're talking, today, like in just a few days, we should get a ruling on whether the highest level official, the Director of Health and Human Services, somebody who the governor has 100% supported and is still in his job and actively working in this job, if he will or will not be going on from his preliminary examination onto trial. We should be finding that out, I think, on the 25th, August 25th.
Well, the book is The Poison City, Flint's Water, and the American Urban Tragedy. Anna Clark, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. We'll put a link at majority.fm to your book.
This was such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for it.
Thank you, Anna. Bye-bye. All right, folks. We will head into the fun half. Just a reminder, this program relies on your support. You can become a member by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, we say thank you by giving you extra content every day. It is just it's under 50 cents a day now. We've calculated to support this program and keep us chugging along. Of course, you get access to all the searchable archives of our fun half, so you could go back, I don't know, years ago now. What are we on? What episode is this? 1907. Nuts. That's a lot of episodes. We are, if my calculations are correct, 93 episodes away from 2,000 episodes. So, also, don't forget justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code MAJORITY, get 10% off all of your coffee needs. Buy the Majority Report blend. Do yourself a favor. Today is Monday. Tomorrow is Tuesday. Tuesday nights is the Michael Brooks Show. What's happening on the Michael Brooks Show, Michael Brooks?
Well, there's a secret celebrity guest coming in, and people are speculating. And
secret celebrity guest.
Secret celebrity guest. People are speculating. There's a lot of speculation.
And this is your anniversary, right? Is that it?
Year-long anniversary of the launch of the show, and I
hope it's John Benjamin.
Me too. I think we all do.
This John Benjamin?
I think we all hope it's
completely out of left field.
No, I know. He's just a celebrity.
No,
we've
Benjamin really a celebrity?
We've DM'd together about doing stuff, actually.
Oh, well, okay.
I'll be disappointed if it's anyone but him.
I can understand that. And I hate to disappoint you.
John Benjamin. We've never ever even heard you ever say the word
Matt's
John Benjamin.
Imposing emotional labor on me. So that's happening. There's, of course, going to be a David Griscom Economic Minute. Jake Tapper will probably go in the gulag. That won't even be a surprise. I want to say just really quick for last week's show, do you remember Piggate? David Cameron's Piggate story? Do you remember that from a couple years ago?
Piggate?
The former Prime Minister of the UK, the do guy.
Yeah, I saw that episode of Black Mirror.
But no, that actually happened.
Well,
I know.
Possibly
did you know that?
I did,
it possibly happened.
Possibly.
I'm not familiar with Piggate.
It was
as a schoolboy, David Cameron may have stuck something in a pig's mouth as a part of like a Tory,
as a part of some type
bonding,
of right, like old
Figgy
school
pudding
arrested
society.
Oh,
yes.
right. Well,
now
I guess that's
into
now a gate. All
we
right.
got it literally
as
was
opposed to
called
just
Piggate.
a young,
what rich
middle school
no college
prank college prank.
Oh, now you are in the Tory state of mind, right?
Public school buggery.
Yeah, public school buggery.
We did cow tipping in North Dakota, but
there really anybody? Come on.
And so I just because I know I wanted to just say that a lot. So many people have said that Brendan's betting the Downton Abbey music underneath us talking about that was really funny. Yeah. So I wanted to give him a special shout out for that. But yeah, that's what's happening on Tuesday. And then we're working on an illicit / sort of up-to-date one on what's happening with Turkey's economy, because it might melt the global economy.
Yes, there's
and that's for
real
patrons. That's what we're working on as well. So patreon.com/TMBS. Celebrity guest. Sorry, Matt.
And Jamie, what is happening on the Antifada?
Well, If you liked our last episode featuring Comrade Communicator, we now have a bonus Real Posadist Hours, where we go over yet more wacky writings of Jay Posadis. We also recorded an episode over the weekend with Army resistor Spencer Rapone. You may know him as the guy who wrote Communism Will Win on his cap at his West Point graduation and became a meme instantly. We talked to the man behind the meme about the connection between capitalism and imperialism. We do a little comparative history of the Vietnam War and the mutinies during it and the Carnation Revolution in Portugal. And we talk about the Army as a potential site of class struggle.
And Matt, back from vacation.
Did post an episode over the weekend, intro to the Scarlet Letter, called The Custom House by Nathaniel Hawthorne. A couple things in there are how Nathaniel Hawthorne made a lot of money working for the government. You could just skim off the top if you worked for the Customs House back then. And yet he did write in that introduction that you can't be a worthwhile member of society if you're living off the government dole. Also,
he was such a... listening to these pods on Hawthorne, it's amazing who you can feel such contempt for. You're like just some like random like high school author, and all of a sudden you're like, I hate that guy.
Also, I don't hate him, but he is problematic. Also, his dad brought the first elephant to the United States from Southeast Asia, and when they got it on board, they realized it was drinking all the water, so they switched it to booze, and then they had to advertise it as an alcoholic elephant when they were back in the States.
Oh, that is a great story. That's a great story. What a wonderful family.
Such assholes.
What a wonderful
horrible family.
Wonderful people. All right. Well, we're going to take a break and just laugh about forcing a kidnapping an elephant and then turning it into a problem drinker. All right. 646-257-3920 is the number. Join us in the fun half. Let me tell you something, Wally Pip. there was some pretty good La Poupées that were thrown down in your absence. And I don't know why.
I did have to Google Wally Pipp, and I've already forgotten about what exactly that. Oh, DiMaggio. Okay, gotcha.
Was it DiMaggio? Really? I don't think it was DiMaggio.
Who took over for Wally Pipp?
I don't think so. I don't think it was. I feel like it was.
I was going to say it's more Aaron Rodgers and Brett Favre, but I don't want to be Brett Favre either.
It was, let's see. Wait a second. I just want to see if this was Joe DiMaggio. Where the heck is...
Pipp is now best remembered as the man who lost his starting role to Lou Gehrig.
Lou Gehrig. Right. Okay. Thank you. Anyways, the point being, there was some La Poupées that Brendan somehow found that apparently have escaped your. This is why I installed the camera.
Matt was on our group chat, our group text, like trying to show me up, you little prick. You think just because I'm high in the Dakotas,
I was going to deactivate my Spotify.
I'll pull the plug on the whole goddamn operation. Oh yeah, punk La
All right.
Poupée. That's real cute.
Let's
some bitch.
That punk one. Did you hear that one? Wow, that is
Nice.
pissed.
Exactly.
I didn't listen to a show.
I have not.
Exactly.
I have not
That's
seen
exactly
Matt like
right.
this at all. I hope he's on camera right now when he said that. No, because that was nuts. All right.
The punk one was actually pretty
Look,
good.
we talked about this the day the Mercatus, I think it's Mercatus study came out. The Koch brothers funded a libertarian think tank to do their best to make it seem like a Medicare for all proposal by Bernie Sanders was completely pie in the sky, would bankrupt the United States, would be hugely expensive. Now, let's put aside for a moment what we know about the ability for the government to spend. The government can spend. It has control over its own currency, and runaway inflation is not a problem specifically because of monetary policy. But let's put that aside for a moment. The big deal was, look, it's going to cost between the years 2020 and 2030, I think it was. Maybe it was 2022 to 2032. It's going to cost the government $2 trillion or something like $32 trillion, something to that effect. I can't remember the numbers off my head. Or maybe it's like $60 trillion, something like that. And in fact, here, I have the numbers in front of me. It is it will cost $57 trillion for the government over the course of that 10 years to implement Medicare for all. However, in the same report was a reference to how much Americans would pay. So understand that if the government takes over and deals with all health insurance, it does a Medicare for all, that is where the totality of expenses are. And it takes it over from the American people, from America as a whole, because now we have the government paying a significant portion, but also private private citizens are paying a significant portion. When you add that up, that number between what the government would pay and what the people would pay in a non-single payer 2022 to 2032 is actually $2 trillion more than if the government was just doing a Medicare for all. So there is a $2 trillion worth of savings in terms of everybody individually in the country. I'm paying it in my taxes now, but I'm actually paying less than I did when I was paying it in my taxes and to the private enterprise that was the insurance company. This is a fairly easy concept to understand, but apparently it is not. Here is Jake Tapper, after making the claim that Bernie Sanders' program will be more expensive than is actually paid, after he's been corrected by different reporters and journalists on Twitter. Here is his response.
Hey everybody, it's Jake Tapper from CNN State of the Union and factcheck.org, and this week we're going to take a look at a claim made by two self-identified Democratic socialists, Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders and New York congressional candidate Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They say that a study funded by the billionaire Koch brothers, who are generally, I think it's fair to say, libertarians and conservatives, that the Medicare for All proposal would actually save the government money.
You know what I love is that we have two self-proclaimed DSA people, but you can say it's generally safe to say that the Koch brothers, a candidate who bought his way onto the libertarian ticket 30 years ago, which funds almost every single libertarian institute in the country. It could be fair to say.
But they gave an interview a couple of weeks ago where they were like, hey, we want to work with Democrats to cut our taxes and
the government money.
Let me thank the Koch brothers, of all people, for sponsoring a study that shows that Medicare for All would save the American people $2 trillion over a 10-year period.
It shows that Medicare... What did he say? It would save the American people $2 trillion. The American people. Okay, just want to make that clear.
Let me thank the Koch brothers, of all people, for sponsoring a study that shows that Medicare for All would save the American people $2 trillion over a 10-year period.
It shows that Medicare for All is actually much cheaper than the current system that we pay right now.
Is that true? Did a study funded by the Koch brothers indicate that Medicare for All would actually save the U.S. government trillions of dollars?
Wait, what? What did you say? Bernie Sanders said it would save the American people. Ocasio-Cortez said it would be less expensive. And then wait, what did Jake Tapper say the question was?
Now.
Is that true? Did a study funded by the Koch brothers indicate that Medicare for All would actually save the U.S. government trillions of dollars?
Pause it. No. I can answer that question. No. That study did not say it would save the U.S. government because no one's made that claim. No one has made that claim. In fact, just seconds before. Now, look, Jake Tapper doesn't edit these pieces. Maybe Jake Tapper was not told, hey, dude, just FYI, we're going to put the claims made by these two people right before you reiterate the claim by them. So you should know that you shouldn't change what the claim is because it's going to make you look embarrassed. To be fair, I doubt he knew this necessarily. I mean, he records this thing. He's a busy guy. He's got a lot of stuff to do. So he may not realize that his moving of the goalpost would be so obvious in the context of this video. So, but continue.
No, it's not true, at least not according to the author of the study. The study in question is a working paper from the Mercatus Center at George Mason University that looked at the 10-year impact of Senator Sanders' proposed Medicare for All plan. Now, while it's true that the Koch brothers have given millions of dollars to the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, and an AP investigation earlier this year suggested that the Koch brothers do have control and influence over the hiring and firing of professors, we should note, for whatever it's worth, the authors of this study said the Koch brothers did not influence them in any way. We asked Senator Sanders' spokesperson. He told us that while the study says Medicare for All would increase the federal budget by roughly $32 trillion, it also says that the projected cost of all healthcare expenditures in the U.S. would drop by $2 trillion. The study's author says that $2 trillion drop is not actually his conclusion. He said that's based on assumptions made by Senator Sanders. In fact, he wrote, quote, "It is likely that the actual cost of Medicare for All would be substantially greater than these estimates, which assume significant administrative and drug cost savings under the plan, and also assume that healthcare providers operating under Medicare for All will be reimbursed at rates more than 40% lower than those currently paid by private health."
Now, the reason why it says Charles Blauhaus, Mercatus Center, as opposed to quoting the actual report that was the basis of this entire thing, is because the actual report says No, these are the projected costs, not Bernie Sanders' numbers. These are the projected costs of healthcare to all Americans. I mean, it really is stunning, the work that's going in here to make this completely convoluted. Right? Now, like, we're no longer basing it on the report. We're basing it upon an interview that I did with the guy afterwards where he parsed the words. We're no longer asking whether the question, Bernie Sanders said it would cost the American people less, and by that I mean the government. No. I mean, it really is. Let's continue.
Health insurance. In fact, he lays out an alternate scenario that does not include savings from provider payment cuts. And in that scenario, the report says that there would be a net increase in healthcare spending. Now, we're not here to make a judgment on the viability of Medicare for all, and we have no idea if the Koch brothers influenced the writing of this Mercatus Center study. But it does seem pretty clear that the presentation being made by Senator Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez about this study lacks a lot of context, and the author of the study says they are not being accurate. A reminder to all you politicians out there, you're perfectly entitled to your own opinions, not to your own facts. I'm Jake Tapper for CNN State.
Wow. I got to say, that is a real impressive piece of just the intersection of hubris and just sheer I'm trying to put it in the nicest light I can, and I don't know why.
Arrogance.
But the
Sophistry.
arrogance. It's the arrogance mixed with either just ignorance or deceit. I mean, I just don't understand. How can you make that jump between for all Americans to the U.S. government? It is quite clear right now. All Americans pay X dollars for private health insurance. The U.S. government pays Y dollars. And the overall cost to all Americans includes the tax dollar payments and what they pay out of their own pocket. But the government does not include in their expenditures what we pay out of our own pocket. I mean, this is pretty basic stuff. And to pretend that that's not the case is really fascinating.
I like this new segment called The Debunk, where politicians and consumer advocates point out studies that show objective things, and then we read the press releases of the embarrassed places that produced those studies that showed the opposite results of what they intended, and then we attack the politicians for misrepresenting.
It was also weird, all the stuff with the Koch brothers, because
that was very weird.
Look, the question whether the Koch brothers influence the people they give millions of dollars to every year to produce these things, we don't even need to go there. All right? I don't need to suspend my disbelief that the Koch brothers don't know how to spend their money. I don't need to suspend my disbelief to believe that a place where professors get hired and fired by the Koch brothers, that in some way they exert too much influence over this stuff. That's completely irrelevant. The question is, what did the study say? And was it misrepresented? And the answer is no. And if you have to go back to the author to get additional material for him to discredit his own study, then guess what? He's admitting to you too that the study said that.
Yeah, Jake Tapper might want to reserve his bitch face for Republicans and not helpful progressive policies that he's wrong about.
He should just reserve his bitch face for stuff that really actually makes sense.
Well,
this is not good.
He should also reserve his Tucker Carlson impression for that. I don't know if you guys noticed, but midway through the video, there was a and they said, he got a little Tuckery there.
Well, it also shows the limitations of journalists as the fact checkers instead of people who actually know what they're talking about.
But I'm sorry.
That's true.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
I'm sorry. You know what? In most cases, I would say you're right. Like sometimes it gets a little bit too in depth, but this is pretty basic stuff. A good 20 minutes sitting down with this, I think you would get over it. And then you see Matt Brunig saying, your mistake is saying the American people, this is on Twitter, refers to the government. It does not. What he's saying is that overall health spending from all sources, not just government sources, goes down by $2 trillion, and thus the American people saves $2 trillion. And Jake Tapper says, discussed it with a team, and we think you raise an excellent point on the government versus the American people. So we're changing that in our video. Thanks for the dialogue.
So then that's a totally, so you might as well just delete the video.
In other words, by changing that in our video, we're going to get rid of the video.
Right.
Yeah, the thread goes on.
I thought there was more.
I don't think he said anything after
He
that.
said something. Snyder. At first, he said he wasn't going to change it, and he quoted the actual Bernie quote again, saying this says what we said it said. Yeah. And then now, okay, he has said, okay, finally.
Right. If you change that part, the whole segment.
It was
done.
after when Ben Spielberg said something, not just Matt Brunig. So it's pretty impressive that at least, and this is the value of things like Twitter. Okay, so Tapper goes on, while Sanders takes this opportunity to hammer the Mercatus study, a reminder that we never took a position on the study or Medicare for All. We stated as every major fact checker that he didn't provide the full context of the study when saying it backs his argument. What?
Sam Harris defense. You just
That
need
is-
to give me
yeah.
more. Give me some more comfy context to be in.
Right. And also, I mean, it should add, Brunig in his follow-up piece says that according to Bernie Sanders' policy director, Warren Gunnels, the Washington Post's Glenn Kessler did not contact Sanders' office prior to writing a similar fact check. I don't know if Tapper contacted the office, but
it's pretty crazy.
I did fact checking for a bit in London in 2011 as an intern. And one thing I realized after a few weeks of doing this is I did not have the credibility to be writing about a few of those things and turning them over in 5 hours.
did you just seek out company and think tank press releases? It's hey, they're saying that
you don't
you're,
have much to go off.
No,
of,
seriously.
really. Yeah.
That is why I think the whole world of public PR, it's so funny because it's something people generically are oh, well, nobody believes that, and it's well, yeah, but literally
half the newspaper
information
stories
processing businesses, that's mostly what you have to go off of for that type of thing. Yeah.
Let's go to the phones. Calling from a 210 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Good afternoon, Sam. How you doing?
I'm doing great. This
John
is
from San Antonio.
John from San Antonio. I recognized your voice, John.
Yeah, I enjoyed another excellent Ring of Fire episode that aired over the weekend, especially interview with Kelly Dietrich from National Democratic Training Committee. Your interview with Digby, you mentioned that you did an interview with Howard Clowie Klein. Do you know when that's going to air?
The Howie Klein thing, I think we're going to end up doing. I think it's going to run this coming weekend.
Okay. Yeah, I want to thank the over 200 people who recently followed me and messaged me after I gave out my Twitter handle on Wednesday. Appreciate your kindness. So there are primaries in Alaska and Wyoming tomorrow. In the Alaska Democratic primary, Our Revolution endorsed Dimitri Shine. Will run against 3 other Democrats for the U.S. House seat. Elise Galvin is the leading fundraiser for Democrats. She's raised $600,000. Shine has raised $194,000. So let's hope for an upset. Okay. Here's a quote from the deeply corrupt California Republican Congressman Devin Nunes. If Sessions won't release and Mueller won't clear the president, we're the only ones, which is really the danger. We have all these seats. We have to keep the majority. If we do not keep the majority, all this goes away. And
this is from that secret audio that was released, right?
Exactly. Yes, your abdication of congressional oversight will be over when the Republicans lose the House majority. This is what's at stake for the American people. Do we slide into an authoritarian rule, or do we hold Republicans accountable and shut down their agenda in Congress? That's the question for the American people. So with that in mind, I want to to comment on the 538 House model, which came out last Thursday. The model
Yeah, I
has
was
three
going to ask you
modes.
about that. Let me just state it, and you tell me if I've characterized it correctly. There is a 60% chance, and maybe you can explain how this happens, but my understanding is there's a 60% chance that the Democrats pick up somewhere between 23 and 40 some odd seats, but there's also a 60% chance that they don't get anywhere close to that, and the Republicans retain the House. And that is because there is a certain threshold that needs to be passed. And if that threshold is passed, it will be like, it won't sprinkle, it will thunderstorm. But if it doesn't get to that threshold, then it's just going to be dry, right?
That's not the way I've read it. You know, I'm
Okay.
looking more at the predictions as far as the actual number of House seats. I mean, yes, they do say they have a 10% chance if they only get 12 seats or under, and then there's like a 10% chance, and I'm just guessing on my numbers. I'll have to open up the screen that they're going to get over 50%. But other than that, I mean, basically, they has three modes. One's the light, one's the classic, and one's the deluxe. And they're all kind of in the same area. Basically, it's 68.6 for the light, 75.3 for the classic, and 70.6 for the deluxe. And so, you're looking at 229, 230, and 227, which all, fairly favorable to Democrats, and also, would have them taking it between 9 and 13 seats. Now, I think what you were referring to is something that we've spoken about before, which is, that they're going to have to win, let's say, so the numbers that are predicted for the popular vote margin, Cass, is like 7.5 in light, 7.6 in classic and deluxe.
Yeah,
and yet
John,
all
all these like classic, deluxe, light, these numbers, they don't mean anything to anybody.
Okay, okay. The light is basically just polling local and what else? Keep it simple. Give me the best forecast you can based on what local and national polls say. Classic is I'll take the polls plus the fundamentals, fundraising, past voting in the district, historical trends, and more. And deluxe is give me the works, the classic forecast plus experts' ratings. So they're all actually pretty similar, to be honest with you. But I mean, as I was referring to earlier, we've talked about this, and we've talked about the Brennan Center, the report that came out in March that said that the Democrats would have to have 10 to 12 points for them to actually take the House because of gerrymandering. I refuted that. Essentially, 538 is also refuting that. Also, they're saying that at 7.5 and 7.6. They're going to get these numbers, which are between 9 and 12 seats above the majority. So I'm not saying that.
So the long and short of it
gerrymandering-
is, short of it is, it's looking pretty good, but don't get too cocky.
Right. I mean, I think the Trump election, even though it really didn't have any kind of differences as far as Senate and House races, I think that everybody's a little gun shy because of the House election, the Trump election, and people are
Talk to
thinking,
me about the Senate. Talk to me about the Senate, John. I get.
Okay. Well, I mean, okay. The model, there was a model that came out for the Senate that had by this company called Optimus, and they're the only ones that put up the model. And they're saying that there's only 11% chance of Democrats taking the Senate, yet essentially they have a 50-50 Senate. And so what they're saying is that all of these races are really tight, and this is what Dave Wasserman wrote in the New York Times today too. This kind of goes along with what he said last August, when he's talking about all of these red states where Democrats have to defend, such as Hyde Camp, Donnelly. Obviously Nelson in Florida isn't a totally red state; it's a purple state. McCaskill in Missouri. And so he's making this point that there's this huge differential even right now between these red states and these blue states. But the only 11% is kind of crazy because they're saying it's 50-50 right now. So essentially all they have to do is flip one seat. And I just, to have that at 11% is just crazy. I would say it's about 28% chance right now. And if the polling can improve in Missouri and Florida, it could go up to, election day to where it could be, as high as 55-45 or even higher.
I guess we'll see.
So, I mean,
John?
Yeah, absolutely.
Appreciate it, man.
Okay, thank you.
Bye. Certainly, the incidents of, well, let's go to, all right. I was going. Oh yeah, let's do the Giuliani one. Is this when he was on Meet the Press? Okay. This is, since we're in this sort of, folks on cable TV have got to just spend an extra half an hour at the office. Is basically what I think is involved here. Honestly, I mean, I get it. You do a bunch of shows a week. It's tiring. It's exhausting, and you lose track of stuff. You get an interview with Rudy Giuliani, and you go, he's just going to say a bunch of jibber jabber anyways. I don't need to prep or review the facts, the basic facts here. I mean, what's he going to do? Lie about the fact that Donald Trump is president or whatnot? I mean, how rigorous do I need to be to prepare for this? My argument would be, if you're having a guest on at the center of what could be, we don't know for sure, but what could be the greatest scandal in the history of the country, even though there are a bunch of lunatics, just read in, get the basic facts in there. Tell your producers, make sure somebody's on the ball here. Because I don't want to do something like let Rudy Giuliani get away with a massive, massive lie on in the middle of this interview that I don't even question. That would be too embarrassing. Here is, well, let's play the video where I'm confused. The truth or the lie one. Let's do the one that he did on Meet the Press.
You believe this is on them, that you would have, that you guys have not delayed the interviewing, delayed the negotiations with Mr.
Yes,
Mueller.
each time by 3 or 4 days so we could write a letter in response. They have taken 2 to 3 weeks to get back to us. So what I have to tell you is, look, I'm not going to be rushed into having him testify so that he gets trapped into perjury. And when you tell me that, he should testify because he's going to tell the truth and he shouldn't worry, well, that's so silly because it's somebody's version of the truth, not the truth. He didn't have a conversation.
Truth is truth. I don't mean to go like...
No, it isn't truth. Truth isn't truth. The President of the United States says, I didn't...
Truth isn't truth. Mr. Mayor, do you realize what...
No.
This is going to become a bad meme.
Don't do this to me.
Don't do truth isn't truth to me.
Donald Trump says, I didn't talk about Flynn with Comey. Comey says you did talk about it. So tell me what the truth is.
Don McGahn might know.
If you're such a genius, Don McGahn doesn't know. If that's the situation, they have 2 pieces of evidence. Trump says, I didn't tell him, and the other guy says that he did say it. Which is the truth?
Okay, that's not the video. That is just Rudy Giuliani being insane and, trying to obfuscate as to what the reality is. That has nothing to do with Chuck Todd not knowing what he's talking about. This has everything to do with Chuck Todd not knowing what he's talking about. They are talking about the meeting that takes place in Trump Tower. Now, it is public information as to the emails that set up the meeting in Trump Tower. Here is Chuck Todd apparently forgetting the linchpin of this entire argument.
The Trump Tower meeting itself is at least evidence of you better investigate. How is it not?
Well, because the meeting was originally for the purpose of getting information about Clinton. The meeting turned into a meeting.
Which in itself, it's attempted collusion. I understand.
No, it's
you
not.
just said it. The meeting was intended to get dirt on Hillary Clinton from a Kremlin
wasn't.
lawyer.
No.
That was the intention of the meeting. You just said it.
All right, pause it for one second.
That was the original intention.
Okay. First off, you're going to get information from a third party about someone you're running against. What are you going to do to provide for that information? Like, I got news for you. The Steele dossier, that dude got paid for his work, right? Like, if someone's showing up at your office, so like, I have valuable stuff for you. And by valuable, I mean, you're going to get something of value. What am I going to get? So forget about the words collusion, because that's not really a legal term. But trading in value from a foreign government is illegal. But continue, because so now he realized that's a bit of a problem.
The meeting was intended to get dirt on Hillary Clinton from a Kremlin lawyer.
No.
That was the intention of the meeting. You just said it.
That was the original intention of the meeting. It turned out to be a meeting about another subject, and it was not pursued at all. And of course, any meeting with regard to getting information on your opponent is something any candidate's staff would take. If someone said, I have information about your opponent, you would take that meeting. If it happens to be
from the
person
Russian
with
government?
a Russian, she didn't represent the Russian government. She's a private citizen. I don't even know if they knew she was Russian at the time. All they had was her name.
They knew she was Russian. I think they knew she was Russian, but
well, they knew it when they met with her, not when they set up the meeting.
Pause it. Not okay. Not, I think they knew she was Russian, because in the back of his head, he's thinking, like, why was this story out there? Maybe I should have gone back and read that first story when the email said she was a representative of the Russian government. The email that invited them to this meeting said she's a representative of the Russian government. The Russian government.
Yeah, okay.
But whatever. You go ahead and say whatever you're going to say.
You know, whatever.
All they had was her
They
name.
knew she was Russian. I think they knew she was Russian, but
well, they knew it when they met with her, not when they set up the meeting. You told me, you asked me, did they show an intention to do anything with Russians? Well, all they knew is that a woman with a Russian name wanted to meet with them. They didn't know she was a representative of the Russian government. And indeed, she's not a representative of the Russian government. So this is much ado about nothing. Plus, the President of the United States wasn't at that meeting. He didn't know about that meeting. He found out about it after. And by the time he found out about it, it was nothing.
Let me ask you this.
Pause it. So nothing that he said there was true. They knew that she was Russian. They knew it was the Russian government that was sending her. The president, if nothing happened there, why did the president lie about what the meeting was about?
Do you think it's partially because just strategically they lie so much at such an exhausting rate that partially playing off the timidity and politeness of people like Chuck Todd, where it's like almost at a certain point, like, well, I can't accuse him of literally lying every single second. So I'm going to need to roll occasionally, right?
I know. No, I think what happened there.
He just doesn't know.
I think he thought there was a reason why everybody believed it, but he didn't have the command of the fact in that moment.
Right.
And so
partially because they lie so much.
Well, I mean, look, there's a lot of information, and it's like he got a little sloppy going into that interview. And so Giuliani just will say anything. And as soon as he sees, like, wait a second, I can get away with this, I'm going to make it, I'm going to keep going until I
totally lie on national television right now.
Oh, because that's the job. Because they know ultimately this is going to be a political question.
Right.
This is not, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they say. If this gets out there, and again, this is why, social media has value, because it intercepts the relationship between what is said on Meet the Press and the way that it's reported by others as what happened on Meet the Press.
Yeah, but what's truth, dude?
But in the end, what's truth? Truth
is not truth. Talk about cultural Marxism. That's some Kierkegaard level shit right there.
That's right. Going to a 518 area code. Who's this? Where are we calling from? 518.
Samuel Seder, can you hear me?
I can, yes. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
This is Dave from Dublin. I saw Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. I saw the the video of that man being assaulted like he was a black person.
Yes.
So how long before the Irish are no longer white again?
Yes, it's just a matter of time.
Oh, well, we worked very hard on getting our melanin count down, so this is rather terrifying.
You've done well.
Actually, this is Dave from Jamaica. How are you doing, Sam?
I'm doing good, Dave.
MR Crew. So the question I really came in to call in for is the with that video we saw of the guy being assaulted at the airport, where he clearly knew he was from all the words coming in out of his mouth. He clearly knew the dynamic that was going on. So, and I know we were not supposed to waste our time with those people, but it makes me worried that means their politicians really don't have to do much to bring them to their sides, because they know the game's up. In other words, it's about resources for them and less for us other folk with more melanin and stuff. So,
are you saying it's a zero-sum game? Is that what you're saying?
In a way, yeah, it's definitely a zero-sum game in a way.
Dave.
But
Really
what do we do? I mean, in that type of scenario, because even though they don't have the majority, for them, if it is a zero-sum game in their minds, how do you defeat that type of mentality?
Well, I mean,
without it becoming physical.
I think to a certain extent, there's some of that is involved in sort of dying out, right? I mean, I really think there is not enough. The baby boomers were a massive generation. Millennials are either, I think, have 1 million people more. I think that we can't underestimate the implications of a generation that did not grow up in the shadow of, the Cold War, of a generation that did not grow up with, first generation sort of like experience with pre-civil rights in this country and expectations that follow from that. It's a very different generation, and I think when they get more power, the dynamic is going to shift. These people are not going to go away. They're still going to be in society, but they're just going to be more outnumbered, frankly.
As of 2019 will be the first year that millennials start to outnumber boomers, period. That's going to be the first year.
And, it's not going to be as simple as that, because boomers have a lot more cash, and so they still have access to political power and consumer power and whatnot. But that cash is going to be, they can't take it with them.
Oh my God, just die.
I'm
trying to do Sam's inner voice here. Just die, boomers. Oh my God. Unless you're a member of the
That's not my inner
Unless
voice.
you're, no, this is you as Peter Thiel wishing death on boomers.
It's very strange.
Hey, I miss doing that impression. You don't like boomers very much, though. You do have personal issues with boomers, clearly.
Do I have personal issues with
definitely.
boomers?
I mean, you don't have to answer. It's obvious.
Of course.
I'll throw that out there. I think boomers are probably, I know every generation says this about every other, but I think boomers are probably one of the worst generations in memory. I mean, I know there's good boomers, but
no, I mean, as a
greed at the level of
three boomers
I want to
as a
close the
member
door
is
behind me.
as a generation, and not all, but I'm not terribly thrilled about Generation X either, to be honest
neither
with
are
you.
we.
But boomers took the largesse of the Great Compression, and instead of saying like, oh, we're getting extra, we should reinvest, essentially, in the broadest of senses. They're like, we should spend.
There is something super gross about having like that full advantage of like I remember one time this guy, it was like a quintessential boomer conversation, and he's just like musing. He's like, yeah, I went to like top state school, $100 a semester. so expensive for you guys now. And I was like, yeah, who did you vote for? He's like, oh, I'm a Republican. I was like, yeah,
Right,
thank you, asshole.
right.
He's
Right,
like,
honestly.
and then he literally said, you should have been at Woodstock.
That is
I mean,
so
I was like,
mean.
wow, you should be shot into the
I mean,
solar
honestly,
system.
like that, the idea of like, it's just a question of like, do you take I don't know, the bonus you get and take half of that bonus and put it back into you reinvest it, as opposed, and I think they were just like, I'm taking all the bonus.
I think it is like those cash experiments, though. Those like random experiments with two people go in a room and one of them just gets randomly assigned more Monopoly money than the other. And they just start acting like, I will have another coffee.
Right,
please."
exactly.
Like even just in that totally, utterly randomized fake environment.
But there was, I think, a different quality, I think, to a certain extent, maybe with earlier generations where there was at least a little bit more of that impetus. But, there was a whole sense of like, history is over. This is the way it's going to be forever. And, you get a job at IBM and you're there for 50 years and then you retire, you get your gold watch and everybody. And I think so there was just like, we don't need to do any of that. But
Well, I should add the caveat that boomers tend to be more conservative at this point in time because the poor ones are all dead now. I read a study and it made a whole lot of sense. So not to let them off the hook completely, but that's definitely a factor.
Well, it's also
I wouldn't doubt.
These things are also economically determined, right? Like you think of the post-war years as this giant where everyone has a job building cars and everyone has their own car. White people generally, right? Like this is, I don't know. It's a lot of it is where we were as a country,
Right.
as like a dominant force,
And they still have that mentality. So
Yeah,
like,
totally.
like you get that from like early child development. All right, Dave, appreciate the call.
Thanks.
Going to the IM's hard math. Hey, MR Bean Counters, could you give me a free membership? A Koch brothers study shows that giving free memberships will save the show lots of money. Dad fail. Sorry. My son, Luke, is a regular IMer. Who can forget nuclear negroid, John McCain's brain tumor, or king of all IMers? Anyway, today is his birthday, and it would embarrass the shit out of him if you would blow the shofar and declare the following in Chuck Schumer voice. It's a boy! My son Luke is a regular IMer. Who can forget nuclear negroid, John McCain's brain tumor? Oh, wait, no. Oh, okay. It's a boy!
I love.
There you go, Luke.
John McCain's brain tumor was a classic.
Maxine Phoenix, did you know your show is a great helper for the self-isolating creatures recovering from narcissistic abuse like me? An antidote, part of my therapy. Love you all. Great. Did not know that. Nixon Plumber, think tank tomfoolery indeed. James Tiberius Dorr. Read your interview with Anna Clark. Could you ask her what the effects of the moon falling into a Great Lake had on the Flint water supply? Dope. The Drug Enforcement Administration isn't exactly known as the big fan of marijuana, but in the new Federal Register filing set to be published soon, the anti-drug agency is moving to more than quintuple the amount of cannabis that can be legally grown in the U.S. for research purposes. That's great.
You have a wonderful day, bro, and I'll see you again soon.
From roughly 1,000 pounds in 2018 to 5,400 pounds next year. Yeah, we need just federal legalization. Let's just do this. Ian in Baltimore, I'm so glad Posadism is finally penetrating the Majority Report family. Praise the nukes and pass the dolphins.
Yes.
Contagious Chameleon, why does Bernie put taxes in the Medicare for All plans anyway? Why does he lead with the lie that taxes fund spending? If he didn't put a pay for in the bill, wouldn't that do more to put MMT in the mainstream because that's the explanation for funding? Well, one, despite the fact that Stephanie Kelton was on the banking committee when he was there, I don't know if he supports that. I don't know if he supports it privately or publicly. But I agree with you. Why put it in? JJ Cool, what do you think about Venezuela's new currency and a 300% raise in the minimum wage? I just haven't read enough about it. Do you have any thoughts on that, Michael?
They're in really bad shape.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think the relevant thing is to explain that some of that is absolutely because of U.S. foreign policy and because of oligarchs there. So it's a much more complicated story, but they're in really bad shape and we shouldn't sugarcoat it.
The incorrectness of the Tapper fact check is even better. The Tapper cites with emphasis that according to the study, provider payments would be cut by 40% because Bernie's plan set provider payments rates at 60% of current private payment rates. This inaccurate statement is also in the Washington Post fact check. However, this figure fails to account for all the people currently not paying for health care due to lack of insurance or those already on Medicare or Medicaid. So in actuality, Medicare for All only results in a 10% cut on provider payments. So in other words, volume will make up for the direct payments that are cut. Trump's Klug. Will the progressive job guarantee revolution come in the next 10 years? I'm afraid that I will be late to the party as my political plans stretch over 20 years. Am I too optimistic? Who knows? We'll have a better sense in the fall as to if the Senate, if the Democrats take the Senate, what's going to be interesting is they're going to pass legislation that they're going to challenge Donald Trump to not sign. And it's going to lock them into positions that are going to be more progressive than we would get in the first year of a Democratic president, unless the Democratic president is more progressive than your average Democrat. You follow? So they can grandstand when Donald Trump is in office.
Giant infrastructure, green infrastructure plan.
Green infrastructure, Green New Deal, Stein 2020. But no, honestly, they can start passing these things as a way of challenging Donald Trump to sign them. Right? And that's when things start getting really interesting. If the Democrats take the Senate, it's not inconceivable to me that Donald Trump does a 180.
I think if they take the Senate, you'll see it'll be very much of the Bill Clinton mold after Republicans took it. I have no doubt.
It's possible. The other factor is that he may really have criminal liability that he's very worried about, and that starts to preoccupy him a little.
There's going to be three things. I'm going to go 180 on populism, double down on racism, and also, guys, please don't put me in jail.
Keep this in mind. There are, off the top of my head, 4 or 5 Democratic senators who could be running for president. There could be 6. There could be 7. They're all going to want to push their progressive bona fides. So they're all going to push progressive legislation in the Senate. If they control the Senate, some of this stuff is going to get through. And either Donald Trump signs it or doesn't sign it. But if he doesn't sign it, there's no reason to believe that a Democratic Senate and House in 2020 wouldn't come back for a second bite at the apple. They'd almost have to. So, because I gifted myself an MR membership on my 50th birthday, I know that today is the 4th anniversary of my member, my most preferred source of news, commentary, and funny voices. Many thanks, gang. Christo, happy birthday. Thanks for being on.
Happy birthday.
Here is a Georgia lawmaker who contemplating the notion that Donald Trump may have used the N-word. This is still a fallout from the whole Omarosa thing. And here is his logic. You get a mulligan. At least that's basically it.
So you say this is an important point here. Yeah. That for you as a man, Donald Trump using the N-word, you personally would have a problem with that.
Yes.
But you don't have a problem with the office of the president using the N-word.
He did not use the N-word as the office of the president. In that office, he used it outside his personal life. Now, if he was president and he goes on TV and uses the N-word, yes, I would have a major problem with that. But he did it before he was president.
So, wait a minute. He did it before he was president, so it's okay?
Again, no, I never said it was okay. Again, it's always wrong for me individually.
Yes.
But as the president...
What is the distinction you're creating here with the N-word? That there's one situation in which I have a problem with it, but there's another one that it's okay.
No, I always have a problem with the use of it.
Okay.
I don't have a problem with Donald Trump used it in the past as my president. I would always say using the N-word is wrong and it's bad and should never be accepted in our society. But just because he might have done it years ago, not as our president, doesn't mean that we need to continue to berate him because he used it. And also, let's go back in time. How old is Donald Trump? 70 years old?
72.
72. 60, 50 years ago, we were not in the society that we are in now where people freely use that word.
We're not talking about
good.
a 16-year-old Donald Trump using the N-word. We're talking about potentially a 55, 60, 65-year-old Donald Trump using.
Do you know
the
how
word.
old he is when he uses it?
I don't know how old he is.
No,
but my
I don't
question
either,
is,
but
why does it matter
you can't
to you?
say if he's 16
you
or if
say,
he's 60.
this is not where I expected this conversation to go, Senator. So I do want to go to military, but the idea.
There you go.
Gotta go to military. Military is very important.
Well, look, there are examples. Listen, Robert Byrd was a horrible, horrible racist who then went on to fully renounce all of that very dramatically and continually. Now, if Donald Trump was to get up and say, I used the N-word that one time.
When I was 52.
When I was 52, 51 and 3/4. And and then
the year was 1998.
It was
a totally different time and era.
Exactly.
Many people
Let's
use
be
that
honest.
word in casual gatherings, Cipriani's.
My understanding
Sometimes
is that the
even call
apprentice
the waiter
was,
over.
Maybe 10 years ago at the like if he said it was 10, that was a very.
Let me take you back
Listen,
to 2011.
Can I just
it's a
say
totally different time.
Everything in the
People couldn't
decade
even
after
picture a black
9/11.
president.
Everybody in the decade after 9/11 was completely out of sorts. So
9/11 was very traumatic for many of us, and we used a word in our private time that I really don't like private time. It's
You
like,
weren't
Mr.
there, okay?
Mr. President, are you on private time? Yeah, just use the N-word, obviously on private time. That's executive time. Remember in Michael Wolff book, he has executive time,
Right,
which
it's
is standing
napping.
for naps. And now
Yeah.
private time means he just stands in the office and just.
Can I say it?
He goes,
Is it private
it's
time?
private time. I
Private
would
time.
like to talk about
Time out.
Omarosa now. If it's
Not
private
president.
time.
Not president. N-word, 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 N-word,
Private
N-word,
citizen.
N-word.
N-word, N-word, N-word.
It's like
N-word.
playing tag when you get into the safe zone.
I'm touching the desk.
Touching
the desk.
Wait, I'm
Can't-
not
I'm-
touching the desk.
Can't be it.
Not touching the presidential
Not touching
desk.
the presidential
Look at
desk.
hands off the desk. Hands on the desk. Hands off the desk. Hands
that
on the
was-
desk. N-word. N-word.
That was a private
N-word.
citizen N-word. Can I say wetback as president there?
I can say whatever I want on my golf course, okay?
Calling from a 702 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 702.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Sam. It's Bro Flamingo from Las Vegas.
Bro Flamingo, what's on your mind?
Hey, Sam. Couple of points. I was wondering because I'm actually I'm not a former New Yorker, but I am from New York. I lived there 22 years of my life before I moved out here. I was wondering if you guys caught the news about Cuomo and that lobbyist in the state of New York basically tried to cover it up, paying $200,000. I guess this former lobbyist, he's been charged, and it came out that he had extensive ties to the Cuomo administration. And the New York Times just came out with it today. I got it in my report when I woke up.
Oh no,
So,
I have not
I was
seen
wondering
that.
if you guys-
I have not seen that as of yet. But I think it's going to be. I think it's going to play into Cuomo's campaign, something like that stuff to top of it. But it's also going to help Zephyr Teach out. She just got the endorsement in the New York Times. And listen, Andrew Cuomo is running as much against Zephyr Teach out as he is against Cynthia Nixon because. The one, first off, Andrew Cuomo knows he's going to beat Cynthia Nixon. The question is by how much. And he wants to make it big enough that he can run for president. But the other problem he's going to have is if Zephyr Teachout becomes attorney general Andrew Cuomo is going to have to spend a lot of money on defense attorneys because that guy is I'm not kidding. I am not kidding.
No, I know.
And everybody knows it.
Also,
And
no, I completely agree.
Everybody knows
Sam,
about
I just laugh
Andrew.
because no, I was gonna say it's gonna be funny seeing how this is gonna play out because when I learned that I learned from you guys actually that Sefer Teach was gonna be AG, I was like, wow, he's in a lot. He's saying he's in a pinch right now.
well, she may not win. She may not win. I mean, I think it's going to be an uphill battle because Letitia James has a lot more, frankly, resources, and is has a relationship with Cuomo. Cuomo's
She also has a relationship with De Blasio, so I mean, and she's well to the left of Cuomo.
Yep.
Not to say, I mean, I'm 100% for Teach Out. She's definitely a much better bet, but maybe
my
even
concern,
with James,
my
there could be a
my
problem.
concern is that when you have politics, you have politics on a spectrum of left and right in this state, but then you also have you have another spectrum, particularly in this state. Things are so transactional in New York State. Politics are so, if not literally criminal, they are corrupt. They're corrupt. And
so one last thing. Oh, go ahead.
So anybody
No, sorry, Sam.
who is in favor, within favor of Andrew Cuomo, I find to
Really,
be
can I
somewhat
just
problematic.
really interesting thing, just to tag onto this. Apparently, the Times endorsement of Zephyr, which I haven't read yet, has a lot to do with Tish James taking money from Cuomo donors. And Ryan Grimm says the irony is that, and this is totally true, the irony is that if Tish James told Andrew Cuomo to take a hike when he offered to support and fundraise for her in exchange for rejecting the Working Families Party, she'd likely be running away with the AG election based on her record of progressive activism.
Yeah. That's exactly the point. Is that my skepticism now that she would take money and be blessed by that operation is concerning to me.
You got to vote for Zephyr. Yeah, no doubt.
Also, one more thing, guys. And I just want to jump because I don't want to take up too much time. I just want to shout out to Jamie real quick because I was listening to Chapo Trap House and I read her article about Ozzy Fest, and you remember that the Jamaican brother called about the boomers, whatever. I just also want to point something out because Steven Pinker, he's like 63 now, so maybe he's considered a boomer.
Yeah.
And I remember in Jamie's article in Chapo Trap House, they were talking about how this guy was talking about, in the future, you guys are going to have 15 gigs and, blah, blah, blah. I was like, 15 jobs? Like, yeah, a gig, and he's like, also, then he said, not only you can have 15 jobs, that's even if you do retire. So, the boomers, they benefit from the largesse of, the Great Compression and everything like that. But also, they're fully on board with like, hey, you know what? Screw these guys. We're putting in the neoliberal agenda. You know what I'm saying? Mix with a little bit of white supremacy, and we're going to push it onto these guys. So I think these guys are just kind of made their deal with the devil. And they're ready to go. They're full stop. So you got the ones that are still alive. They're fully on board with this garbage. And millennials and the people who have their heads on straight, they just really got to combat this nonsense. Like, to me, Steven Pinker's like a fraud. It's all this neoliberal feel-good garbage. All right, guys, I got to jump. Thank you again for taking my call. Appreciate it.
Thanks for reading.
Uniquely American.
And I gotta say, I like to dump on boomers as much as anyone else, but not all of them are Steven Pinker.
No, of course. Of course. I'm not even saying that like it's not individuals. I'm not talking about individuals. I'm not talking about individuals. It's just simply the reality is a group of people grew up in a certain period of time. They accepted a worldview. This has nothing to do with individuals when I talk about boomers. They grew up in a certain context. And the problem is that contexts change. Things change. But because of the size of their generation, they had inordinate amount of influence on our society for an extended period of time through changes and because of the context in which they were born and raised. And really the speed of the changes that have taken place over those 70 some odd 80 years, 90 years, they it has screwed up society. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying the individuals.
And it correlates with things like capital concentration and all the economics, that sort of drive things.
Yeah, like the way they got that way in the first place.
In a second, I'm going to tweet out, if for people who follow me, I would say Mehdi Hassan did a really good interview with Steve Pinker, and he really pushed him on climate and also on the idea that poverty rates are going down for the poorest. And it's so great because he also just gets into the very foundation of these quant people who love to sort of take something as complex as poverty and reduce it to one stat. And, Mehdi Hassan's talking about people who actually work in the field, saying that the actual dollar amounts for what constitutes poverty need to be radically revised in terms of how people actually experience deprivation. And Pinker has nothing. It's a really good interview. I'd recommend people watch it. Right. What a surprise.
I gotta say that panel was particularly instructive, because it's not often that the bones show or the ideology shows in these kinds of events. And it was very nakedly like, oh yeah, you're never going to retire. And that's the way I want it. And that's fine.
Uniquely American.
Yeah. I just had to stick up for my parents for a second there. So
what did she say?
Shout out to mom and dad.
She had 3 jobs. Is that what it was?
Yeah. There was that was from
Tell that story.
It was like a town hall with George Bush. And a woman gets up and says, President Bush, I have 3 jobs so I can take care of my children. And Bush's response is, 3 jobs, uniquely American, like with the pride. Like, look at that. I've barely had 1 job at a time.
We got you guys doing backflips.
I was making so much money doing absolutely nothing. That's not uniquely American. That's been going on forever.
Can you sing me a song too?
But just the ability, we live in an amazing era of where we could actually have 3 jobs available to an individual, and yet they still are not making enough money to take care of their kids. That is uniquely American, right? Because you can have times where you have no jobs. Other places have that. And you can have times where you work 3 jobs, but you're making so much money you don't even know what to do with it. But to have 3 jobs and barely getting by, that is uniquely American.
Heroes of late capitalism.
And here's another one. Of course, this one is, that's from August 4th, though. I think we probably covered that.
Oh, yeah, I wrote an op-ed about that.
Kids
assuming it's not a different 6-year-old selling lemonade. Oh, you know what? It is a different one. Oh, my God. That's horrifying.
So this is... we mentioned this the other day, but it's now been fully established that the attack by the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen that killed, was at least 40 children, and 44 now, I guess. And some of the images are just devastating. We see like the backpacks of the kids, the UNICEF backpacks is spread around. The CNN has established that the weapon was a 500-pound laser-guided Mk-82 bomb made by Lockheed Martin, one of the top U.S. defense contractors. Here is the report by CNN.
This video of shrapnel was filmed in the aftermath of the attack and sent to CNN by a contact in Seder. A cameraman working for CNN subsequently filmed these images. Munitions experts tell CNN this was a US-made Mark Mk-82 bomb, weighing in at half a ton. The first 5 digits there are the cage number, the commercial and government entity number. This number here denotes Lockheed Martin, one of the top US defense contractors.
We're at the forefront of the science that makes them real.
This particular Mk-82 is a paveway, a laser-guided precision bomb. Its targeting accuracy a particular point of pride for Lockheed Martin. Part of an arms deal with Saudi Arabia sanctioned and contracted out by the US government. So why does this matter? because the devastation inflicted by the Mk-82 is all too familiar in Yemen. In March 2016, a strike on a market using the similarly laser-guided 2,000-pound Mk-84 killed 97 people. In October 2016, another strike on a funeral hall killed 155 people and wounded hundreds more. Then the bus attack on August 9th, where they're still counting the dead.
Now, in this graphic that they put up, they put the makers, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, of these weapons, which is great. And apparently the Saudis were like, well, the reason why we blew up that bus was because we thought there were two people on there who we wanted to get. So, in other words, the issue is not, oh, we killed dozens of children. The issue is we just missed, we thought there was somebody else on there. Like, if they had killed those two people, in other words, there would have been no problem from their perspective with that strike. And we are aiding and abetting, making it all possible.
You know, if people really want to respect the flag, maybe we start outfitting, our stuff in the Raytheon and General Dynamics logos instead of the American flag.
We refuel them every day. Raytheon and these other companies have lobbied specifically against any type of sort of accountability, like Sanders and Murphy and Lee had legislation on this last year. There's a tiny thing in the military authorization bill, which is essentially that Mike Pompeo needs to get assurances from the Saudis and the Emirates that they're trying not to kill innocent people. Meanwhile, since 2015, they've literally, as regular practice, targeted hospitals, as you said before, and there's a cholera outbreak there. And Yemen, is a net food importer. So their reliance on basic food security has to do with those port access. And nothing indicates that Saudi is going to stop.
Yeah, and we're on the wrong side of this. I don't know. The only
we are this.
Yeah. Meanwhile, we've heard this plan has been kicked around since the beginning of the Trump administration. The Eric Prince, head of, what do they call it now? Jay or something? Formerly Blackwater, the brother of Betsy DeVos, someone who, at the very least, set up some very questionable meetings in the run-up to between the election and the inauguration of Donald Trump in some, what is it, this Caesarean Islands? Seychelles, yes.
The company was Academi.
Right. Oh, is it Academi? They keep changing it.
Yeah, it's she in the Caesarean Islands.
They have like a marquee with
right. They just keep switching it. It's just like just all the vehicles have just like those magnetic. We're just going to slap a new one on after we've done something.
Well,
horrible.
yeah, that's actually what they demonize.
Here is John Bolton raising the possibility that this plan presented by Eric Prince at the beginning of the administration to essentially privatize all operations in Afghanistan. We're going to have a paid mercenary, not just soldiers, but our entire presence would be paid. This is getting into like very creepy, like RoboCop territory, like futuristic, bad stuff where there is no accountability, right? Like there's not even, it's their job, period. John Bolton says the president's considering this, and who knows?
What I remember over 17 years is the attack on 9/11. And I think the administration is determined that it never happen again. And that's the bottom line, is the security of the United States.
Would you consider privatizing there with using contractors instead of U.S. military?
Well,
there have been some reports about that this week.
There are always a lot of discussions. I find them helpful. I'm always open to new ideas, but I'm not going to comment on what the thinking is. That'll ultimately be the president's decision.
Yeah, there you go. So obviously they're thinking about it. Otherwise, John Bolton will go, no, we're not going to do that.
It's up to me.
Who am I, Steve Bannon?
Depends how Betsy does.
So this is pretty nuts. This is our weekly story about, maybe bi-weekly, about the terrorist organization ICE. You'll recall ICE is trying to make us safer. And here's a story of a man driving his pregnant wife to a hospital for delivery of their baby. She is getting a C-section, I believe. And they stopped to get gas. And it's a scheduled C-section, so it's not an emergency, but they're on their way to the hospital. And ICE takes this guy into custody. I don't know how they followed him. Maybe they ran his license plate or something to that effect. Here, ICE officials come up behind the car. This is all the camera, right? The camera footage. And what's this music? Who put that music? But they come up to the car, and you can't see all of it, but they grab him, they handcuff him, they walk him away. You know, what they could have done is said, oh, we're going to escort you to the hospital, and when your kid is born, then you got to come with us.
And there's some mixed information, too, because apparently ICE is saying this guy is wanted for murder, although apparently all we have to go on is ICE's. They haven't provided anything to corroborate that.
Them, right?
And the other thing is, as well, even if that's true, are you saying you wouldn't do something like this? This isn't a line you wouldn't cross? Because they definitely do want to send that message that we can get you at any point. So specifically this case, don't factor into whether or not ICE is intentionally terrorizing people.
This was a pretty funny moment. I guess our friend Ronald Reagan calling into his favorite show, Washington Journal. This is not Ronald Reagan. I just want to make that absolutely clear. This is not Ronald Reagan calling into Washington Journal. Who was on here? This is Paul Waldman, I believe, and I don't know what the host's name is. Do you know the host? But they take calls from 3 different lines. They have a Republican line, a Democrat line, and an independent line.
That's also known as the party line.
Right. The Washington Journal on C-SPAN does not bleep out stuff. They just drop it. They have it on delay, and so there's a drop they do with the audio, but they keep the video in. So you've got to look at the face. I think it's Paul Waldman, right? Or is that who it is? Who's a writer for what? I think like the American Prospect or Washington Post. And just keep an eye on his face as this guy talks about Barack Obama.
And then Trump's own proclivities make it even worse.
Moving on to Whitehaven, PA now. Republican line. Christopher, hey there.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Barack Obama is an illegal alien.
How do you know this?
Hussein Obama. Alias Barry.
Go and try to get somebody who has something constructive to add to the conversation.
Yeah, apparently he said death to the N-word. There we go.
He was on, he was on personal time. Excuse me. He was on personal time.
Do we not care about free speech?
I wonder, if there's if the number of instances in situations like that have increased.
Also,
anecdotally, it feels like it.
Anecdotally, it feels like it. I mean, I've been in this business of pulling stories like that and just commenting on them for 15 years. And I just don't know that we had that many. Maybe it's just people are more efficient today in terms of both their use of the N-word and also in their finding instances of it. But, you call into a national TV show and hey, it's Bill from the, and you say this stuff, like, it's scary. People are certainly emboldened.
When does he get, and how can we get his information? to Dave Rubin.
Exactly.
He was silenced right in front
He
of our
was.
eyes.
I mean, we literally just saw his ideas get shut down in a public forum.
Yeah, someone tell Michael Tracy.
Yeah. Nice.
We mentioned earlier that the primary is coming up. It's September 12th or 13th in New York State. Big implications in New York. Big implications for Andrew Cuomo if he has the ability to go into a national election in 2020 without being embarrassed by Cynthia Nixon. Big implications in terms of Zephyr Teachout because of the jurisdiction that the New York State Attorney General could have in terms of setting, influencing like EPA policy or environmental policies and practices and food safety practices, and also corruption in terms of the Trump administration and in New York State politics. Very big deal. Here is Cynthia Nixon explaining the concept of the IDC. And one of the main reasons why people have big problems with Andrew Cuomo, that he midwifed this IDC, which was the Independent Democratic Caucus, which essentially was just handmaidens to the Republican Party, and were literally paid off to vote with Republicans, given bigger offices, given more money for their staff. I mean, I don't know if it went into their personal stuff, but just about.
I'm talking about with other electeds. So as soon as he went into office, behind closed doors, he incentivized a group of democratically elected state senators to go over and vote.
Right?
With
What
the
are they called?
Republicans.
What are those guys called again?
The IDC.
Yeah,
the
we talk about the IDC. Those
Democratic
scumbags.
Conference,
Yeah.
right? And he also allowed the Republicans in the state Senate to gerrymander their own districting maps. So when he did these two big transfers of power to the Republicans in the state Senate, he basically gave them the ability to block pretty much every progressive priority we've had here.
Which for a state that generally votes Democratic,
Yes, 2-1.
many people are beginning to talk about how not progressive our state is with regard to like raise the age and like you pointed out, the gerrymandering thing,
Right.
with regard to how we're dealing currently with city housing and housing issues.
That's the Ebro show.
No.
Where does that?
It's on Hot 97.
Hot 97, which is
Ebro in the morning.
The big urban station that
Yeah,
like
it's
a
a
50,000
rap
watt.
station. That is a big. They definitely, I would say, helped De
I love
Blasio
hearing
get elected mayor. He was on that show a long
It's
time.
nice hearing them say, "Oh yeah, the IDC." We talk about those guys. Does Cuomo say anything besides like, "Oh, I'll try to make the IDC less"?
Doesn't he just lie about it? Every
Well,
couple
he
years?
is now pushed back on it, and theoretically it's gone. But who knows what happens when he gets
But
back.
what about
He
like
did that
originally
before.
doing it?
Huh?
He
Exactly.
did that before
did it
when he
at-
was challenged by Zephyr Teachout.
Yeah.
And then as soon as the election was over, he
Yeah.
got the gang back together.
But I guess my question is, what does he say to account for making it in the first place?
Oh, he just says like, what am I supposed to do? I'm not in charge of
Not
these guys.
that.
I'm not in charge of these guys.
Right.
But he was literally in the room putting it together.
He goes from.
Well, yeah, because then he doesn't have to look like the bad guy for vetoing progressive legislation.
Exactly.
He doesn't have to veto it, right? It just doesn't even come to him with them. They bottle it up.
Well, that's the point.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to be put in a position
Right.
of vetoing
Right.
it.
He
He doesn't
doesn't
want to be in
have
a
to do the veto.
position of signing it, because then it would inhibit his chances of being the moderate reach across the aisle guy in the
And his,
fantasy
donor
world
base,
in which he runs. So,
You want to do the Phil Mudd one too?
yes, let's do this this last clip here. I'm not really of two minds about the revocation of the security clearance for Brennan. The bottom line is, it's one thing to have a policy. I sort of feel like these guys should have to go through a new vetting process every, year, 6 months, whatever it is, when you have a security clearance. And that vetting process should be, are you working for any corporation or any entity or any foreign government that does any business with the United States. Are you working for any business or corporation or entity that could benefit from things that you might learn with a security clearance? And if you are, then you cannot, your security clearance lapses. That would be a very sound policy, it seems to me. Here is this guy, Paris Denard. He is the guy on CNN who argues in favor of the Trump administration. The best part was there was another video where he's actually going back and forth with Joan Walsh, and he doesn't know how to answer the question, so he gets mad that Joan Walsh has taken over the show, and he's like, I won't answer a question from Joan. I'll answer it only from what's her face, the Campbell, whatever, or whoever it is,
Naomi
the host.
Campbell.
No, not Naomi Campbell. The host. No,
Anderson Cooper Campbell.
I can't remember her name. And it's
Did
really
she
ridiculous.
ask the same question as Joan?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's so
she
great.
goes, Joan can ask questions. You guys are both CNN contributors.
Right.
And he's like, I won't do it. But you should try and pull that one. Too. It's pretty funny.
He gets real riled
But he
up.
gets very riled up. But here he goes after this guy, Phil Mudd, who was I guess a former CIA guy. And Phil Mudd gets pretty upset and indignant, but he doesn't quite address what Paris Denard is actually the point he's trying to make. But it's interesting to see this back and forth, because I do think for a lot of these guys, the question is like, wait, I'm going to lose something that this is a big, having security clearance, and you go out into the private market, there's value to that, and people monetize it.
A lot of these people that have these security clearances, and this is the secret in the swampy Washington, D.C., they have them and they keep them because it's profitable for them after they leave government. Because if you have a security clearance, especially high-level security clearances, your contracts and your consulting gigs pay you a lot more money because of the access that you have. I hope the president continues to do this, and I hope he adds Omarosa to the list, because if she has a clearance, she too, because of her actions, should have it revoked.
Well, I don't know if I'd put Omarosa in the same category of the 75 people who signed those letters, but Phil Mudd, I imagine you want to react.
Profitable, Paris. When I am requested to sit on an advisory board, let me ask you one question. How much do you think I'm paid to do that at the request of the U.S. government? Give me one answer, and you got 10 seconds. How much?
I'll ask you a question. How much are you paid for your consulting
Answer the
and
question.
contracting gig? For being a
I have no
former
contracts
official?
with the U.S. government that pay money.
I'm not talking.
Zero.
And this is the thing.
When
I'm not talking
I'm
about
asked
what the
to
federal
offer
government,
advice to the
Phil.
U.S. government,
Phil,
I
let's
get
be
paid
honest.
zero.
Phil, let's be
That's
honest.
it.
I'm not talking about your role with the federal government. I'm talking about the
who are you
contracting
talking about?
gigs
You
that you
talking
get
about
from being
General
a
Hayden?
consultant and a contractor. The consulting firms that they form and that you all get is because you get more money when having a consultant for having the security clearance.
That is
Stop acting like that
incorrect.
doesn't happen.
I have
That's the
zero
truth.
consulting relationships with the U.S. government. Zero.
I'm not talking, Phil, that's a good talking point. I'm not talking about relationships with the government. I'm talking about in the private sector. When you have a security
I
clearance
have
and you
zero
keep it.
relationships with the private sector that involve my security clearance. Zero. I get $0 from consulting companies that deal with the U.S. government. Are we clear?
Well, I will be clear in saying that everybody in Washington, D.C. knows if you don't want to be honest about it, that's on you. But if you have a security clearance and you keep it, you
We're
get
done,
more
Jim.
money to
We're
have
done. Get out.
Phil,
it's not your show, so I'm
25 years
staying
in
right
the
here.
service, and this is
Don't
the
be
shit
so
I get.
defensive about
Get
this.
out.
Don't be so defensive about this. Your voice is still here. You can still do whatever you want.
let's
But
take
the
a beat.
politicalization of the intelligence community under this administration, with the people coming on here every day, tweeting and talking about this administration, you all have made it about politics, not the president.
Let's take a beat here for a second. And Phil, I appreciate your patience because I know it's getting personal here.
Now, this is ridiculous because, first off, it is absolutely the case that access to the U.S. government is sold off all the time. It's absolutely the case that if you have security clearance, you go and that's a pitch to CNN or MSNBC or to Fox News, and that ups your value as a talking head on there. That's absolutely true. It is also true, that is absolutely not the reason why Donald Trump is doing this whatsoever. The idea of instituting a policy so that you cannot monetize your role in the U.S. government is such an anathema to the Trump administration that literally every single person involved in the Trump administration would have to be fired and walk away. If that was the standard, there is no way that is what this is about.
It's a little thing called leverage, Philip.
Okay, you just laid it out perfectly, both the broader problem and the specific reality distortion of Trump. And now can we just take a minute to bask in that middle-aged man meltdown?
He was super mad.
It was funny when he got mad. That is true.
Dude, Phil Manda always has those meltdowns. And
It's
they're
awesome.
This really is the era of, I forget somebody said it, there's just something about like white dudes in their 50s and 60s just really letting it hang.
Well,
Like,
he thought he
everything-
could bulldoze him with like a couple dodges that weren't very.
No, the dodges were actually quite noticeable.
But I'll tell you something. It was super impressive on how angry he got about something that he sort of knew. Like,
It's like, don't say that on CNN.
that's a lot of indignant. That's a skill to be able to become that indignant about something you know you're in the wrong about. I think is you get a cookie for that.
I feel like
one.
I might have too much shame
Or
to
it
ever
means
do
you-
something. Like
maybe it just
Best-
means you worked at the CIA.
All right.
Best defense is a good offense, folks.
One final phone call of the day. You're calling from a 616 area code. Your name is 616. 616. Going once. Going twice. Go 616. Gone. All right, sorry. You could have been the final caller of the day, but instead it's going to be 949. You're calling from a 949 area code. Who is this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam, it's Big Mo from Orange County. How are you?
Good. How are you? Who is it? What's your name?
Good. My name's Mo. Call me Big Mo.
Mo. What's going on?
Hey, I'm actually at Trader Joe's. Let me step outside because people are looking at me like I'm just a weirdo talking to somebody on the phone here.
What? Nobody talks on the phone at Trader Joe's?
Thanks, guys. That's not what we're talking about. Well, it's kind of an uppity Trader Joe's. I'm in Orange County, California, so you know how people are here.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Hey, so a couple things. First time, long time. I used to listen to you guys on Air America, and I'm really glad to have rediscovered your show. You, Michael, and Jamie are awesome, so just want to let you know about that.
How did you rediscover it?
And then, you know, I was actually listening. I listen to a lot of left-wing YouTube, and I think one of your clips just came on. You guys have really good clickbaity titles.
Oh,
and I think I
thank you.
just clicked on one. I was like, hey, wait, I remember this guy from back in the day. That's awesome. I didn't know that you still had a show.
Oh, great.
And then second quick comment before I get to a question. I remember, I think you said you went to law school for a year.
I did.
You know, I'm an attorney. You would actually make a great attorney, but I think you made a better career choice by not being an attorney. But I just want to let you know, I think the way you argue and debate is really effective. And had you gone on to be a lawyer, I think you would have been a great attorney.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm going to tell my dad you said that.
Hey, no worries. Hey, quick question. So I've been kind of appreciating the role of marketing and image a lot more after this election. And I was talking to somebody about Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, and they think that Biden would be a better candidate than Bernie Sanders just because he looks more like an effective candidate. You know, he stands up a little taller, he has a fuller head of hair, he just looks a lot younger even though they're about the same age. And I guess I wanted to get your guys' perspective, all three of you, on if you could sort of craft a perfect candidate for 2020, regardless of policy, the actual look and feel of the candidate, what would he look like? And I say he because, let's face it, most likely most people will sort of gravitate towards a man for president, unfortunately, but that's kind of the world we live in. So just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on what a good candidate would actually look like, kind of policy aside.
All right. We'll answer. We'll let you go and answer after we hang up. Appreciate the call. Thanks for listening. Glad you found us. I don't know if I accept the premise that it necessarily has to be a man. I mean, we're seeing a lot of examples in these special elections, in particular, And we're going to see more. We'll get more evidence, I think, in the midterms, where people are. I think, broadly speaking, women are doing much better in these elections than they have in the past. But if you're just looking at like the image of someone, I don't think that the look is that important. I mean, honestly, Donald Trump is not the guy I would fashion to say look like this guy. Massively overweight. With a very bizarre, hairpiece type of situation. That doesn't seem to me to be like, the guy you would engineer to run for president. My sense is youth would be good. Someone in their, 50s would be good as opposed to someone in their 70s. But I think at the end of the day, it really is going to be with the politician who can go in and come off as being the most, and I hate this word, authentic, but not have to dance around what they're offering. And so, maybe it's a Sherrod Brown, maybe it's a Bernie Sanders, maybe it's a Elizabeth Warren. I think Gillibrand, it's tough. I think she's making all the right moves in many respects, but she's not that far away from having some pretty different positions on some things. Cory Booker, same problem.
He's also just
Kamala Harris.
Cory Booker's so basic.
Well, it's not just a question of basic. It's a question of
I'm trying to get into the zone of the guy's question. He's just kind of lame. But no, I think that
presentationally, you think Cory Booker's lame?
Well, not in terms of.
Yes.
I'm expanding beyond just how he looks, his whole demeanor and voice and style. He's a cornball. But I think that I'll stipulate, just say 100% support Bernie if he runs, and Joe Biden. Not only would Joe Biden is probably at the bottom of my list, even on this list. But I think in general, just as a pure win a general proposition, I think Joe Biden, for a variety of reasons, would totally crush and destroy Donald Trump, and it might be just the easiest head-to-head there is.
I'd much
think
rather
that's possible.
take Chris Murphy than Joe Biden, though.
Yeah, but Chris Murphy doesn't have the charisma.
He doesn't have any charisma
that Joe Biden does.
I'm not a Joe Biden fan, but objectively, the guy does have a certain charisma, and he would play well in those places.
Can I say two quick things? So, first I want to defend my man Bernie a little bit. Anyone who's seen him shooting basket after basket or booking it across a hotel lobby knows that he's got quite a bit of verve left in him. But in terms of the, shall we say, more performative aspects of politics, which isn't just the way you look, but it's a lot of things, I think the anger, the ability to channel populist anger needs to be there. And in that sense, I think Bernie wins over most people.
Joe Biden can fake that too.
Well, Bernie doesn't fake it though. So
right, I understand.
If we're in an authenticity age, maybe
but Joe Biden can fake it.
Oh yeah, look,
where it comes
I think
off.
just performance-wise, Biden is. If we're talking on that level, that's a good politician.
But I don't think that's as relevant as. I really just don't think that's as relevant in this day and age. I don't think Hillary Clinton lost because she wasn't because of her, sort of very narrow, deficiencies as a sort of performative candidate. I mean,
is her liabilities with?
I think there was some. Right? I think there was some liabilities in regard to that. I don't think she was great at that, but there was a lot of other stuff that I think were problematic for her. That were more determinate. All right, 5 IMs, and then we're out of here. Mayday Mindy. So you haven't answered my call in a month and a half. Yeah, you answer Orange. Really? Mindy, I don't know what number you are. We'll get to you, Mindy. We'll try and look it up. Cuck Todd. My wife always tells me monogamy isn't monogamy. Pataki on the attacky. Sam, if there's a blue wave, you can play this.
You missed that. That was
what?
really good.
The truth is truth.
That was
No,
truth
I know,
is
I
truth.
know, I got it.
You were giving me that full props. That was great.
I thought that was pretty good.
No, that was really good. Cut
I'm just
time.
racing through these. Cucklester the Clown. Sam, I believe it was reported on Chuck Todd's own network by Richard Engel in special report that she was in fact working with the Russian government. Ryan from Ohio, when you said a journalist made a fool of himself, I immediately assumed it would be Chuck Todd. Jesus. Dark matter. To add to the Space Force discussion, read about Operation Burnt Frost. I think that's where this is going. It's about a Navy ship shot down a malfunctioning satellite during the late Bush administration. Since modern militaries are highly integrated with SATCOM, there are major implications with developing these weapon systems. No bull. I think your level of coverage concerned re Russia intervention election matters is just right. The fact that those on the left deny it completely is a tactic I personally believe is a function of them being Jimmy Dore, trying to appease and attract audience from the right and not in pursuit of a real justified investigation. The reality is that these deplorable morons are lost to reason and won't be attracted by just being anti-Russiagate. The likelihood of Donald Trump denouncing racism and his use of the N-word almost as likely as Sam declaring the absence from the use of the term zero sum. Left is best. Jenna from St. Louis, millennials plus Gen Xers easily outnumber the boomers. We can make the changes to our generations need together. Well, the millennials, though, they don't share the same perspective because they grew up at a different time. What percent of each of you put Republican secretaries of state not certifying elections because of detected irregularities? Small. Black Marxists on Shapiro's talk with Greg Gutfeld, they both claimed on the left politics too serious. The left take politics too seriously. Wow, politics is just a game for them. Jenk's interview with Tulsi is amazing. Wish progressives celebrated her more. I hope he brought up the fact that she was speaking just very recently to basically a hate group. It's not they don't hate white people, but or African Americans, but people should dig into that. Final I am of the day. Did you guys see Cenk get a bit flustered with TYT Viewer last week? I'm going to make the assumption that it was Jimmy Dore Viewer because they tweeted in voting for the lesser of two evils is still voting for evil. To which Cenk rolled his eyes and went, they're still doing this? Adding a short time later that he thought experiment, basically asking if there was an election between George Bush and Hitler, who would you vote for? Which in a cruelly ironic way may have been the options in the 2016 election. See you folks tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. Into years while I shifted in and out of gear.